Hello, glad to see you on my channel. I really value it. And today I want to share with you a wonderful story. It's a dramatic story that will come as a total shock to everybody. It is a really amazing story. So enjoy watching it.
Air. The air up here is so good. It seems different from the streets, and that wind gently pushing at the boy's chest, as if pushing him away from the edge of the roof and discouraging him from doing what he had planned. Billy drew in a full chest of air and spread his arms out to the side. Just one step and he would soar like a bird. It wouldn't take long, but he would have that feeling of flight. And there were people running around down there. How funny they were. Small, like bugs. Some standing in clusters, some fidgeting, but all, as one, with their heads up, looking up at him, Billy. The boy was thrilled by this feeling of attention. So many people had gathered for him, and they were all thinking about him, worrying about him. And when he took the last step, a wave of terror would sweep through the crowd, and someone would shriek in fright. Billy revels in that sense of crowd control. Mom doesn't know that yet. When they tell her, it's gonna be a blast, that's when she'll regret everything she said to him. Let her cry, let her cry, let her cry. That's what she wants. The amount of yelling Billy's heard from her today. Let his mom choke on that phone she took away from him as punishment. Billy won't need it now, but Mom will regret what she said. She'll feel bad about it. She'll think it'd be better if he did what he wanted and she kept quiet. And that nasty Uncle Arthur, he'll be surprised. He didn't expect that from Billy. He sure didn't. Let him feel guilty too. His stepfather's words to his mother as Billy ran away from the apartment in tears still echoed in the boy's mind. Out of control, your son is completely out of control. You can't keep someone like that in the house. He should be institutionalized. What did Billy do? Well, he didn't sleep at home. What's wrong with that? He's 12 years old. He bet with the boys if he could stay alone in the basement of a high-rise all night. The last light bulb had been blown out and it was completely dark. None of the boys believed it, but Billy could, and he held out until morning. He turned off his phone beforehand, knowing his mom would call. Of course, none of the boys guessed what it had really cost Billy, and now they would never know. After the scandal with his mother and stepfather, Billy jumped out of the apartment very angry, slamming the door loudly and kicking it with his foot. The boy habitually stuck his hand in his pocket, trying to find his cell phone. There was no phone. That's right. He'd been deprived of that too. How could he call his friends now? Well, he would try to find someone in an abandoned construction site near the soccer field where he and the boys liked to play ball. Older guys went to that construction site, smoking there and sometimes drinking alcohol. Billy and his friends started going there too, showing off to the older boys. He tried smoking. The boy didn't like it. Tears came to his eyes and coughs tore up his chest. But trying to keep up his mark in front of his elders, he shook his head and said, "Well, I've got into it. I can't live without whitefish at all. First thing in the morning, just a smoke." Billy went to the construction site, but unfortunately, he didn't find his friends there. 3 older boys were sitting on stacked bricks. Billy knew 2 of them well. They had been here often and were in the same high school as Billy in the graduating class. But the third, who at the boy's appearance quickly hid something behind his back, was a stranger to Billy. "That's Billy. He's a friend. You don't have to hide it," said one of the boys Billy knew. "Billy, are you here for a smoke?" "Yeah," Billy answered importantly. "I wanted to find my boys here. I'm out of cigarettes." The unfamiliar guy took out a cigarette from behind his back, puffed it greedily and passed it around. It wasn't even a cigarette, but a cigarette, and it wasn't filled with tobacco, as Billy guessed at once, though he'd never seen such things before. "Do you want a drag?" The stranger squinted at Billy slyly. "What's the matter with you?" One of the construction workers choked on the smoke. "He's just a kid. He's too young." "It's all right. Let him try. Come here, kid, give it a try." The boy handed Billy a cigarette with an unfamiliar sweet odor. The boy approached, eyeing the cigarette warily. He didn't want to take it, but it was embarrassing to lose face in front of the boys. After the first puff, the boy coughed violently. It seemed as if he was going to spit out his insides. It's okay, it happens. Try again," the strange guy encouraged Billy. And Billy did. His head felt foggy and his body felt unusually light. Thoughts flowed smoothly, measuredly, and suddenly felt so good. The boy came out of the construction site swaying slightly. He wanted to fly. That's right, to fly. Billy didn't realize how he had climbed to the roof of the apartment building, but he remembered his thoughts at that moment. Now I'll fly over the city, over the people, and there will be nothing else. Neither the eternally disgruntled mother nor the stepfather who looked at me with a prickly look and curved his lips contemptuously at my appearance. And most importantly, I won't have to go back home, where I'll be nagged and called a difficult child again. The boy stretched his foot forward and thought of his grandmother. How upset she would be. As luck would have it, she was visiting at their house right now. She has something with her heart. She's having a checkup. What if she gets worse from being upset? Man, I don't want her to find out. I feel sorry for Grandma. You can't do that to her. Billy put his foot down. Boy, listen to me, boy. Is something wrong? Came a coaxing voice from the other side of the roof. Billy turned his head and saw a pretty woman. She stretched her open palms forward and continued to speak. I'm not getting any closer. See, I'm standing still. Let's just talk. What's your name? Billy was already 12 and had watched a lot of movies with crime plots, so he knew right away who this aunt was. Now she's gonna talk to him, talk him off the ledge. She will tell him that any problems are solvable. The boy took a deep breath and took a step. Only in the other direction. Billy took a step away from the edge. Don't talk to me. I wasn't going to jump. Just decided to stand on the edge of the roof. I don't know what you're all freaking out about. The woman, not fully believing the apparently unstable teenager, did not try to rush towards him. She continued to smile a glued smile and asked about the problems in the boy's life. I don't have any problems. I told you I wasn't going to jump. Billy, with an unsure, still wobbly gait, headed toward the woman. When the boy was brought to the police building, he thought for some reason that he was going to be pushed into a cell with the hardened criminals. This, of course, did not happen. The boy was brought into a small, cozy office and sat on a soft couch. Opposite him, slightly moving the chair, sat the same aunt who had talked to him on the roof. But no matter how much she questioned why he had gone to the roof, Billy remained stubbornly silent. He lowered his head and mumbled one phrase. I wasn't going to jump, I wasn't. The psychologist sat with Billy for quite a while, but she didn't get anywhere. Then she left the office and went to talk to the boy's mother, who she knew had come to the police a long time ago. The woman, already interviewed by the policeman, sat in the corridor on a hard bench and cried. She was willing to talk to the psychologist. Yes, we scolded Billy and took away his cell phone. He's grounded, you know. Billy does a lot of mischief. How can you not scold him? It's a common story, the psychologist sighed. Children at that age react very strongly to such punishments. They have their whole lives on their phones. To be honest, I have not figured out whether your son was going to jump or not. He was probably just trying to scare you and wasn't planning on jumping. He wasn't pulled off the edge. He went down on his own. Plus, how can I put this to you? The kid's under the influence of drugs. What kind of drug intoxication? He's only 12. What are you implying? I realize how old Billy is, but still, the boy probably smoked weed. There's a distinctive odor from his clothes. You'll take your son now, but I'd strongly advise you to keep him under a doctor's care today. Tomorrow I'll come to your home and the child welfare authorities will be here. As you must realize, your family will be under observation for some time. God, Natalie clutched her head. What a shame. We're perfectly normal people, being monitored by the guardianship authorities. It's embarrassing. Billy walked without lifting his head as his mom picked him up from the police station. The psychologist, who came outside after them, saw the car they were leaving in and muttered, "Oh, I see. You can see from the mother that she has a lot of money, but she can't take care of her child." Natalie drove in silence. She didn't want to talk to her son. She only looked at him in the rearview mirror. The boy sat in the back and never once raised his head. In fact, Billy was very nauseous and was afraid that he would vomit right in the car, and then his mother's silence would be immediately broken by the usual screaming. Contrary to the psychologist's advice, Natalie didn't go to the doctor. That was the last thing she needed right now. Billy looked normal except for his lethargy and cloudy eyes. Natalie sighed heavily. Why couldn't Billy be like all the other kids? Why did he always let her down like that? Now Arthur would speak up again. I told you so, Arthur. Remembering her husband, Natalie craned her neck and turned the mirror slightly to look at her reflection. 6 years ago, when Arthur started courting her, she couldn't believe that such a handsome and young guy could be attracted to her. At that time, the woman was already 38, and Arthur was not even 30. In addition, Natalie had never shone with beauty. Men never paid her any attention. Vankin's father was a fleeting affair and immediately slipped away when he learned that her friend was pregnant, and Natalie hadn't been in a relationship since. And then there's Arthur. Her friends whispered enviously that the guy had stolen Natalia's money. She really did earn very well and was considered a wealthy lady. At first, the woman herself thought so, but Arthur melted her heart, convinced her of his love. And even though he does not work anywhere, but all of Natasha's free time they spend together, his husband is so caring and attentive. Natalie felt herself blossoming like a spring flower under the rays of simple female happiness. Except for Billy. When Natalie and Arthur married, Billy was only 7 years old, but he had already taken his stepfather in stride. He couldn't bear to have him in the house. Natalie understood why his son reacted the way he did. The boy had been spoiled by his mother's love and attention, and he didn't want to share it with anyone. But Mom deserved to be happy too, didn't she? Why should she devote herself only to her child when she finally, for the first time in her life, has a man who loves her and is ready to marry her? Billy, who had been an ordinary, though mischievous child before, went off the rails after his mother's marriage. Natalie became a regular in the principal's office at school. She constantly paid for broken glass, a cracked toilet bowl, and even the office door, which had a huge hole in the center. It seemed like the boy was trying to think of something else to do. Yesterday was the first time he hadn't come home for the night. And now this. He wasn't going to jump anywhere. That's obvious. He's doing it out of spite, trying to get back at me. Billy was always talking about Arthur, saying that in his mother's absence his stepfather called him names, the most affectionate of which was puppy, and even raised a hand against him. Natalie didn't believe it. Given all of her son's bullying antics, it was understandable that he was lying, wanting to separate her from her husband and have her alone again. To be fair, her husband had spanked Billy a couple times in front of her. Just a couple of times in front of her. The woman didn't see anything wrong with it. The boy could use some manly training. The woman drove up to her house and pulled into her favorite parking spot. She got out of the car and waited for her son. But the boy continued to sit in the car. Natalie abruptly yanked open the back door and hissed, "What are you sitting there for, you little bugger? Get out of the car now." "I don't want to." Billy shook his head. "I don't want to go home." Natalie grabbed her son by the sleeve of his expensive sweatshirt and pulled, not afraid to tear it. Arthur was always grumbling that his wife dressed the boy too well, and with the way he handled things, she shouldn't spend so much on the kid. The woman only hummed in response. Her son's clothes were no comparison to how much money she spent on her beloved husband. That's the one who was definitely dressed to the hilt. Natalie always liked to see women staring at her husband, even when she walked beside him. Natalie was proud that this handsome man belonged to her and only to her. "Are you coming out today or not?" The woman pulled her son with all her might. The sweatshirt rattled, coming apart at the seam. Billy rolled out of the car, almost falling to the pavement. "Is Uncle Arthur home?" the boy asked, giving his mother a sidelong glance. "Of course he's home. Where else would he be?" "He's waiting impatiently for you," the woman shouted. "Mom, I really didn't mean to jump off that roof. I just climbed up there and looked down." "I don't doubt it. Go on." Natalie pushed her son in the back. "We'll talk at home." Arthur looked indignantly at Natalie and Billy as they entered the apartment. He had been running through the windows for a long time, waiting for them, and finally he saw a familiar car pulling into his parking space. The man stepped out into the hallway. "Brought the bastard?" he asked his wife with a contemptuous curve of his lips. "And what are you, bastard? You do not live in peace. You have already taken to the roof?" Arthur was boiling with anger. How annoyed he was with this little scoundrel. He already had to live with Natalie, and she wasn't the most attractive woman in the world. And then there was this irritant who was annoying him with his antics. no peace of mind. Arthur looked at his stepson's face and his eyebrows slowly crept up to his forehead. Natalie, what's wrong with him? Is he on some kind of medication? The shrink said he's been smoking pot. What do you mean pot? Is he high? Wow. The man grabbed his head. 12 years, what's gonna happen next? Natalie, this is extreme. How many times have I told you? Your son is a finished man. He's no good. I've told you 100 times. Let's put him in a boarding school for troubled teens. They'll work with him there. I'm not forcing you to give him up, but let him be in a place specially designed for such unruly kids. The psychologist will be visiting us for a while. And by the way, our family is now under guardianship, Natalie said tiredly. Well, it's about time. That's all we need. I'm not surprised it was coming. You never listened to me, and now we'll be considered a dysfunctional family and you'll be a bad mother. Arthur turned his attention to Billy. Why would you say something asshole? Why don't you snap at me like you always do? Oh yeah, you're on drugs, or whatever you call it. You must be feeling good right now, or is it the other way around? You were gonna jump off the roof, weren't you? Why didn't you jump off then? And you're going to jump off the roof yourself. Clean-shaven, came a commanding voice from the depths of the apartment, and after the voice appeared its owner, an elderly woman of small stature, but with an expressive, stern face and a fixed gaze, came out into the hallway. Mom, Natalie exclaimed, why are you interfering? Arthur is trying to educate Billy. Parenting, the woman stretched out. Is that what we call it now? Calling a kid names and slinging mud at him and telling him to jump off a roof is parenting. The old woman looked at Arthur in such a way that he shrank as if he had shrunk in size. And you'll jump off the roof if I hear you say that to my grandson again. Julia, you don't know everything, Arthur wailed in a falsetto. That boy is out of control. He's not just any boy. He's my grandson and your son, by the way, Natalie. He's a bit of a troublemaker, and who at his age doesn't? You've really pissed him off. Natalie, where are your maternal feelings? Why do you let that slick-ass mother of yours pick on that boy? Mom, Billy needs a man's hand, a father's attention. Family? Where do you see a father? Or a husband to yourself? Look at him, he's dressed like a girl. And his hair? He probably goes to your salons, licking his hair. What's that on his head? I wonder what money your husband uses to dress up like that without working. Julia, Arthur squealed, I have a college degree, if you must know. I've been offered a good job more than once, but Natalie doesn't want it. Natalie is against it. Julia mocked the man. Is that a man's word? You're sucking up to my daughter and taking money out of her, and you're hurting Billy too. Natalie, don't you see, this guy doesn't love you. He only wants your money. If you didn't have it, he wouldn't even look at you. That's it, Mom. That's enough. Natalie burst out. I don't want to hear this in my house anymore. I have a family and you're sticking your nose in it. What kind of family is that? All you have is a son and you're listening to this slick. And he's ready to put Billy in boarding school. You're an idiot, Natalie. I'll take Billy to live with me in my village for a while. You can't take him to the village now, Natalie said indignantly. A psychologist will be visiting us in the next few days. Besides, summer vacation is still a month away. So I'll stay with you for a month. What do you mean? Arthur started stuttering. Julia, your examination will last how long? A week? Then go to your village and we'll bring Billy back to you at the end of the school year. Natalie saw the look Arthur gave her when she said that. He could hardly tolerate his mother-in-law's presence in the house, having agreed only for the time she was undergoing the physical examination. Mother, what are you really doing? We don't mind Billy staying with you this summer. It's not a bad idea. We'll bring him ourselves, and you can go away. You've got a farm there. What about your cow and your chickens? The neighbor will look after them. I said I'll stay, so I'll stay. You won't kick me out. Don't forget, daughter, I bought this apartment for you when you weren't earning so much. So I have every right to stay here as long as I want. Come into the kitchen, Billy. I'll make you some tea. I've got some herbs I brought with me, and I'm going to brew you a nice flavor. Julia approached her grandson, unceremoniously pushing Arthur and her daughter out of the way. Billy stood with his back against the front door. The boy hadn't said a word the whole time, preferring not to interfere with the adults' squabbles. When Billy heard about the village, he was sad at first. He didn't want to go there at all. All his friends were here, and soon the summer would be merry. On the other hand, would it be a fun summer for him? Suddenly, Arthur told his mom, and she really will give him to this damn boarding school. Better the countryside. Plus, close to his grandmother. Billy loved his grandmother. Despite her bossy character and stern speech, he always felt love from her. His mother used to be like that too, but Arthur's arrival in the house had changed her a lot. Billy couldn't remember the last time his mother had kissed him or squeezed him like she used to when he was a child. Julia walked over to her grandson and hugged him tightly around the shoulders, pulling him against her warm side. "Come on, Billy, let's have tea." Passing by his stepfather, who was frozen in place, the boy couldn't help himself and threw a triumphant look at him. He loved his grandmother because she was the only one who could put Arthur in his place. The aroma of herbs brewed by his grandmother was extraordinary. It instantly soaked the whole apartment. Billy, who was almost back to normal, inhaled it with pleasure. Immediately, he remembered his grandmother's house in the village, the large veranda where she used to put her grandson to bed in summer, covering him with a warm quilted blanket, and the ringing silence in the morning, broken only by the roosters. Billy squeezed his eyes shut. A whole summer at Grandma's. What would he do without his friends? Well, there was still a whole month to go, and the best part was that Grandma would be here. Arthur wouldn't be able to humiliate him in front of her or hit him, as he often did in his mom's absence. The hot summer was coming to an end. Billy had never imagined that he would enjoy living in the countryside with his grandmother so much. And there were no problems with friends here either. The boy had new ones, from the local boys and from those who, like him, had been sent here for the summer. The boys ran around the village all day long. In hot weather, they raced to the local river, ate strawberries in the fields. In general, always found something to occupy themselves. It was possible to stay out late, but Billy tried not to abuse it, for his grandmother would not go to bed without waiting for his grandson. Billy came home with joy, because he had delicious pies, steamed milk in the morning, and most importantly, his grandmother's love. Not like with his mother and stepfather, when Billy just didn't want to come home sometimes. It wasn't without pranks, of course. No matter how hard Billy tried to keep his impetuous nature in check so as not to upset his grandmother, he didn't always succeed. One of the biggest incidents had been a fire when Billy and two other kids had almost burned down a local farmhouse when they decided to build a fire behind it and roast sausages. Then Grandma got really mad and beat her grandson on his bare feet with nettles. But Billy was not offended, and stroking his burning feet, he realized that he had received a well-deserved beating. It was only a pity that the summer flew by, and in the last days of August, Natalie came to pick up her son. The woman came alone, without her husband by train. She didn't stay the night, despite Julia Stepanovna's entreaties. "Mom, I can't stay late. First of all, I have work, and secondly, we've already delayed. It's high time to dress Billy for school, and we've only got a few days left." All right, the old woman mumbled. "Go ahead. But look after your husband, Natalie, and don't let him torment Vanya. It's not right." "Yes, the boy's a spoil sport, but you weren't so good when you were a child either. Remember yourself and don't scold Billy unnecessarily." Natalie was silent to all her mother's admonitions and only moved her eyebrows. It was strange, but she didn't seem to miss her son at all. This summer had been wonderful for her. Arthur had been more attentive than ever, also always calm. No one else disturbed the peace of the family, and the couple managed to go on vacation at the sea without Billy and his constant antics. But all good things come to an end. Like summer, and there's no getting away from it. Billy has to go to school, so I had to pick him up. Natalie hoped that in 3 months her son had matured and settled down a little. Arthur met Billy calmly and even kindly, which the boy was surprised by. Of course, Billy couldn't have guessed how much his stepfather was actually waiting for him to come home, just not with the best of intentions. Arthur's life wasn't standing still this summer either. The man had a new girlfriend, a very young girl, long-legged, beautiful. Natalie worked a lot, so Arthur had enough time to spend with his new girlfriend. But to go out with a girl like that, you needed money. Young beauties have big demands, and although Natalie did not limit her husband in money, but still, for large sums had to at least somehow account for it. His wife could ask him at any time what he bought for such a sum. And here, a new girlfriend asked for an expensive cell phone. Arthur already broke his head what to ask his wife for money so as not to arouse suspicion, but he could not think of anything. It was at that moment that he remembered Billy, and an insidious plan emerged in the man's mind. On Friday of the first school week, Billy was hurrying home from school. It was kind of strange, but the boy was going to go with his stepfather to pick out a new refrigerator. Arthur himself had suggested it to Billy. The man had been telling his wife for a long time that the old refrigerator had fallen into disrepair. The food in it was getting frozen or spoiled. Natalie had no time to deal with the purchase, so she cashed in the money, asking her husband to buy the refrigerator himself. Unexpectedly, her stepfather asked Billy to go with him. The boy agreed. Somehow lately, the stepfather was not like himself, not picking on his stepson and talking kindly. Because of this, Billy himself began to try to keep himself in check. The boy restrained himself from unnecessary antics, not wanting to cause negativity. He agreed to buy a refrigerator with his stepfather. Maybe if his relationship with him improved, his mother would be nicer to him. Billy entered the apartment almost at the same time as his mother, who had arrived from work and had been summoned by Arthur with an urgent call. "What's the matter?" the woman asked. "Why are you yanking me around in the middle of the workday? What's wrong?" At these words, Natalie glanced at her son, who was throwing his briefcase off his shoulders, and exhaled a sigh of relief. After her husband's call, she had certainly feared that the call was related to a new prank, but apparently it was not. The son entered the apartment quite calmly. Unfortunately, after a couple of minutes, the woman changed her mind after listening to the agitated Arthur. "Natalie, you remember I was going to go shopping for a refrigerator today. You told me to get the latest model, more expensive. While I was waiting for Billy to come home from school to take it with me, I went to the nightstand for the money and it wasn't there. I went through the whole apartment. Natalie, the money's gone." "What do you mean, it's gone?" Natalie was confused. "Did you take a good look?" The woman rushed into the bedroom and went through the nightstand again. Then she looked back at her husband and Billy, who were frozen in the doorway. "Not really," she shrugged. "Have thieves been breaking in?" "What thieves, Natalie? If they were thieves, they wouldn't just take the money. All your jewelry and valuables are in place, I checked. Besides, how could the thieves know we had money in the nightstand? It's not like the apartment's been ransacked." Billy shivered as his mother and stepfather's eyes locked on him. "Billy," his mother said softly, "did you take the money?" The boy staggered back in surprise. "Mom, what are you doing? I didn't take it." And then Arthur behaved in a way that was not typical, not like his usual behavior. "Natalie, let's not slander Billy for nothing. We're going to go and quietly check his room." Billy was seething with anger at the unfair accusations. Anger and a burning resentment that turned to surprise when his mother pulled from under his mattress a carton of cigarettes, a new speaker, and a few other inexpensive little things that had obviously been bought recently. "This isn't mine," the boy blinked his eyes. "This is the first time I've seen all this." Tears of resentment covered his eyes, and he could not see the time of departure of the train to his grandmother's village on the scoreboard. The teenager was at the train station, and he had come here on foot after he had jumped out of his apartment without even having time to change his clothes. Right in his school suit. He didn't even take his cell phone out of his briefcase. He didn't have time for that. It was a long walk to the train station, and it took a long time to get there, but Billy couldn't calm down. Tears of resentment flowed by themselves, and the boy rubbed his eyes, turning them into narrow, swollen slits. How unfair it was. Why didn't his mother believe him? Yes, Billy could do a lot of things, but he would never steal. He wouldn't take an extra dime without asking. He didn't shoplift, although there were some of his friends who would slip a candy bar from the supermarket shelf into his pocket. Billy had always had a very negative attitude towards stealing. Did Mom know that? She looked at him with such contempt, as if he were a stranger. And his stepfather only added fuel to the fire. All the goodwill he'd shown the boy in the last few days was gone. He screamed, spitting spittle. A thief, a petty, sneaky thief. Stealing from his own people, from his own family. Stealing from his own mother. You shouldn't be allowed in the house, you thief. You belong in juvie. I didn't take anything. I didn't take anything. Mom, why don't you believe me? Billy shouted desperately. Where did all this come from? The woman pointed her hand at the things found under the boy's mattress, spread out on the bed. Can you explain what you bought it all with? I didn't. It's not mine. I don't understand where it came from. Stupid to deny. Natalie remained calm for some reason. But that calmness frightened Billy even more, and even more so, his mom's stare. She'd never looked at him like that before, not even when he'd almost jumped off the roof. Arthur continued to yell, using his usual vocabulary and calling the boy nasty words. That's when Billy boiled up and allowed himself something he'd never allowed in his stepfather's direction. Shut up, he shouted. Shut up, you creep. You're lying. You're lying. Arthur stumbled back in surprise and stood staring at the boy with his mouth open. Billy didn't see it anymore. He couldn't see anything in front of him. A burning resentment swept over him and he ran headlong out of the apartment. At first, the teenager ran, running for his life. Then he took a step. Where to go? What to do? Now his mom would definitely put him in boarding school. Billy was sure of that. He'd stolen the money, sassed the stepfather his mom listened to so much. Of course, what would she want with a son like that? Grandma, she's the only one who can help. I wish I could get to her. She'll hug and caress and comfort. She'll know it wasn't Billy who took the goddamn money. And now Billy's standing at the train station looking at the scoreboard. No, it can't be. The boy rubbed his eyes again, wiping away the tears. Had he missed today's train? That's right. The next one wouldn't be until tomorrow. Where would he go until then? To his friends is not an option. His mom will find him there right away, so he'll have to hang out on the streets till tomorrow. The rest of the day, Billy wandered aimlessly through the streets of the city. Toward evening, he went back to the station. It was light, and there were benches to sit on all night. That was Billy's plan, except that he didn't realize that there was a policeman on duty at the station. After half an hour in the waiting room, the policeman began to look at him with interest. Of course, it was getting towards night, and the boy was here alone and in a school suit. Billy realized that it all looked suspicious, and sooner or later the policeman would inquire about the purpose of the boy's stay at the station. He jumped out of the building and took a quick step away from the station. What now? Where to spend the night? Maybe in the basement? Billy remembered his night spent in a dark basement on a bed and shuddered. No, he wouldn't want that to happen again. Better a construction site like the one he and his friends used to go to smoke. That's right, they'd have to find a construction site where they could spend the night. Billy searched for a construction site until dark. To his dismay, there was nothing like it on his way. The boy began to despair when he saw an abandoned building. Apparently, it had once been a business, but now it was just a derelict with a half-collapsed roof and broken, wreathed windows. The boy walked almost all the way around the building before he found one of the entrances with a door that had long since been kicked in. Broken bottles and brick fragments crunched loudly under Billy's feet. It was scary. The teenager decided not to go too far and entered a room on the first floor, near the entrance. Entering the room, the boy was startled to see that he was not alone. In the flickering light of a thin candle sat two homeless men of indeterminate sex, one of whom held a greasy glass with an incomprehensible liquid in his hand, and the other was eating something strange, maybe taken from the trash. Billy froze in place. The bums turned at the sound of footsteps and squinted into the darkness. It's a kid, one of them said in a drunken voice. Kid, why are you climbing construction sites at night? Nothing, Billy answered fearfully. Can I stay here till morning? I won't disturb you. The bums looked at each other. I see. Did you run away from home? One of them laughed hoarsely. Despite the hoarseness in his voice, Billy realized it was a woman. All right, sit down. There's nothing to buy you. I'm not hungry, thank you, Billy lied, though his stomach rumbled at the mention of food. By the scanty light of the candle, the boy made something like a bench out of bricks and sank down on it tiredly. The bums did not bother the boy with questions. They continued to drink without paying attention to him. Billy quickly fell asleep and dozed off in a sitting position, pressing his cheek against the cold brick wall. It was late in the day, and the time was getting late. When the bums had drunk their mess, one of them, a man, got up and went to the bathroom. As he passed Billy, he scrutinized him. The light from the lantern from the window opening fell on the boy. Policeman who took the missing child report examined the woman with great judgment. Usually moms of children make a panic in the first couple of hours if the child does not contact. But here it had been over 24 hours, and the mother had only deigned to worry. Natalie could see the judgment in her eyes, and she wanted to tell the policeman that her son had stolen money from the house and was probably skipping school. But her mother's words, spoken over the phone a couple hours ago, still echoed in her mind. "Natalie, don't tell the police that Billy stole the money. It's not true. I'll never believe it." "What are you trying to do? Get your son booked? If you think of telling me that, I'll come and report you to the police. That's where the theft comes from. Look for Billy. Your son hasn't been home for 24 hours and you've been sitting still." "Mom, I thought he'd come back like he used to. And you're wrong about Arthur. He has no reason to steal money from me. I give him money for everything he needs. You mustn't talk badly about my husband." "You don't? Is it okay to speak ill of your son? I've told you many times and I'll tell you again, you're a fool, daughter, a fool. Look for your son. Go to the police immediately and file a missing persons report. And do whatever you have to do in such cases. I come to town myself, but I'm thinking, what if Billy shows up here and I'm not home and he's gone again? But when you go to the police, don't mention the money." Natalie hung up in frustration. She already regretted calling her mother. She had done it out of the faint hope that Billy was there in the village and then she wouldn't have to embarrass herself with the police. She had to. The policeman held out a business card to Natalie. "Look, we'll do what we can, but I suggest you call this number. They're volunteers. We need to find that child immediately. They're gonna start combing the city tonight." "Okay." Natalie gritted her teeth and took the card. At that very moment, Billy was sitting in an abandoned house, wrapped in an old, dirty blanket that the homeless men had thrown over him after they had taken away his suit and shirt, leaving him in just his panties. Waking up in the middle of the night, when the bums were pulling off his suit, the boy tried to resist violently, but the forces were unequal. The result of the fight was a bruise shimmering under Billy's right eye. After the bums took the suit, they left. But before they did, the woman took pity on the shaking boy and threw him a rag, which turned out to be a shabby, smelly blanket. "Here, cover yourself up, or you'll freeze to death." Billy was reluctant to touch the odor-exhausting rag, but the September night was not warm. After sitting naked on the cold bricks for a while, the teenager was so cold his teeth chattered. He grabbed a blanket from the dirt floor and wrapped himself in it, trying not to breathe. It felt a little warmer. It didn't get any warmer, and for the rest of the night, Billy sat awake, occasionally jumping up and down to keep warm. Morning came, and Billy still couldn't get out of the abandoned building. He was ashamed to stick his head out like that. What would people do when they saw him? They'd take him to the police, of course, realizing the kid was in trouble, but the police will take him home. They'll tell them about the stolen money, and that's it. What lies ahead for Billy? Billy ran around the abandoned building all day, looking out all the overgrown windows. He hoped some teenager around his age would walk by and ask for help, at least some clothes so he wouldn't draw attention to himself. Except that the abandonment was in an industrial zone, and passersby were rare there, let alone children. At least the day was warm and the boy could finally warm up, or at least stop shaking. But there was another problem. Billy was terribly hungry and thirsty. It got to the point that the boy in desperation raked through the trash left by the homeless, hoping to find something to eat. He found nothing but rotten apple slices and empty cans. Toward evening, Billy felt like crying again. He realized that the train to his grandmother's village was long gone. Billy considered himself a rather mature boy, and he was ashamed to admit it, but now more than anything else he wanted to be near his grandmother, to have her hold him close to her, stroke his head, and promise that everything would be all right. She was the only one the boy could trust in this life. Night had fallen outside, and the homeless couple from last night were returning to one of their sleeping places. This week the bums had been living in this very abandoned house. Lighting the way with a blinking flashlight, a woman walked ahead of them. Suddenly, in the dim circle of the flashlight, a figure appeared, curled up under an old blanket. "Oh," cried the homeless woman, "who is it here? Kid, have you been sitting here all day? You didn't go anywhere." "Where would I go like this?" answered Billy in a thin, chilled voice. The hobos were very lucky to have the suit. When they saw it on the boy yesterday, even they realized that it was expensive. Natalie's desire for nice things had played tricks on Billy. "Do you have any water?" Billy asked. "Oh boy, you must be hungry. All right, we're going out tonight. Come on, we'll feed you." In a couple of minutes, the teenager sat next to the homeless man who had robbed him by the wavering light of a thin candle, stuffing his mouth with Sprat and tomato sauce and drinking water from a dirty bottle, forgetting his squeamishness. When the satiated boy moved away to his stack of bricks and tried to doze off, the woman who had gotten drunk on alcohol, which, by the way, had been bought with the money from Vanya's suit, said to her drinking buddy, "We should get some clothes for the boy in the morning." "No way," muttered the drunken bum. "I'm not going to spend money on him. Nobody's talking about buying him. We'll look for something at the dump. What do you want him to do? Die here because of us?" The ER doctor looked at the old woman with judgment. "You have a terrible tachycardia with your diagnosis. You need to be hospitalized immediately." "I said I'm not going." Julie replied stubbornly. "Do your injection there. Give me a pill. I need to be home." "What shot?" "Well, we'll take the tachycardia away. What if she has a heart attack?" "With your diagnosis." "Diagnosis, diagnosis, diagnosis. I shouldn't have shown you those papers." Despite her poor health, Julia still had her bossy tone, and the doctor gave in. She gave the old woman an injection and sat with her until she felt better, and then she left, muttering unhappily that the old people were driving themselves to the grave with their stubbornness. Julia might have taken Billy to live with her forever after the roof incident, but she'd been stopped by the damn diagnosis. Her worn-out heart was failing and there was something wrong with the valve. Surgery wasn't recommended. The woman might not survive it. She didn't know how long she had left, probably not long at all. "Then I have to live. Yes, I have to live, for Billy's sake." Julia decided and picked up the phone. "Natalie, I got Billy. Yes, he's here. Why are you yelling, you stupid bitch? Why don't you ask if your son's okay? Cancel your search. Billy stays here for now." "Mom, he can't stay with you. The police have to talk to him at least. Besides, he's got school. I'll come get him tomorrow." "Don't bother. I'll bring my grandson to town myself. I'll stay with you again for a while. I can't leave the boy with you." "Now, about the missing money. Did you talk to the clean-cut man?" "Don't start, Mother. I told you before, Arthur couldn't have taken the money." "Who do you think did? Billy? If you talk to him about your money, I'll give you a life of paradise with your slick. I'm still in condition, you know me. You don't want to open up about your Arthur. Then forget about the money, but don't you dare mention it to Billy." Julia had a lot more to say to her daughter before she hung up. She did it all in the other room so her grandson wouldn't hear, and when she was done talking, she came out to the boy. "Billy, did you mean it when you said you wanted to live here with me? Are you sure?" "Yeah, I'm sure. It's everything I've dreamed of these last few days. This summer was the best summer of my life. I wanted it to never end. I don't want to go home and see Uncle Arthur and Mom." "Not even Mom?" Julia asked quietly. Billy lowered his head. "Yes, and Mom too. She listens to Uncle Arthur all the time and swears at me. That's how she could believe I stole the money. You knew right away it wasn't true. Sooner or later my stepfather would convince my mom to put me in boarding school. It's nice that we have a big village with a school. It's only till the 9th grade, But we'll see. Do you agree to study in this school, Billy? Yes, I agree, nodded the teenager with hope. Then we'll fight to keep you with me. We'll fight until we win, Julia said. Natalie drove the car with irritation. She braked sharply at the red light and missed the moment when the light turned green. They honked impatiently behind her. Blink your own horn, Natalie muttered angrily. She was very angry. Angry at her mother, who'd started this whole custody thing with Billy. Not that the woman was against her son living in the village for a while, but it would have to be unofficial, without any paperwork. On the other hand, to transfer a boy to a village school, you need a reason. So Julia had made a mess of the custody thing. Natalie was somewhat surprised when the guardianship officers, who had been visiting their home for a long time, sided with the grandmother. For some reason, they didn't like the situation in the family. And then there was the psychologist who had visited Billy after the incident on the roof. There was even talk of terminating Natalie's parental rights, but she rebelled. What do you mean, termination? Why would she be so embarrassed? Is she a bad mom? Billy is clothed, the fridge is stocked, and everything is the best. No, Natalie couldn't agree to that. So Julia asked her daughter to voluntarily sign the papers for Billy to stay with her temporarily for family reasons. What kind of custody could mom get with her diagnosis? If the caseworkers found out about him, they'd be out of the question. But even then, Julia threatened her daughter, saying that if her daughter mentioned her heart, she'd give them a good time. She'd move right in with them. I'll never leave my grandson again, the old woman said. If you don't give him to me in the village, I'll come to live with you, and you can't do anything to me. Do not forget who bought your apartment. Arthur, having learned about such statements of his mother-in-law, waved his hands at his wife. Natalie signed everything. Let Billy live with her. You know that she will not rust. She can fulfill her threats. Well, if the old lady wants a mess, let her have it in the form of an out-of-control grandson. It's embarrassing, Natalie shrugged. It's embarrassing in front of people. How will I explain to my acquaintances why my son lives in the village with his grandmother? It doesn't matter. People. I don't care what they say. But remember how we lived the last summer and imagine that it will always be like that. And so Natalie was on her way to sign the papers. She'd been pulled out of work. The woman decided to sign, even though she was angry. It's embarrassing in front of her friends. Well, let them say what they want. At least now in my family with Arthur will reign in peace, muttered the woman and accelerated at the traffic lights, rushing forward. Oh, how cool it is here. A girl with a rare name, Martha, was running her fingers over the expensive finish of the hallway. Arthur, why haven't you ever brought me here before? Your Kikimora's always at work. Arthur brought home his girlfriend for the first time and was very nervous. Although on the one hand, what was there to be nervous about? The man knew that Natalie wouldn't come home until the evening. It was like that every day. And Martha had asked him to come home a long time ago. Martha knew he was married and was privy to many aspects of her and Natalie's married life. And the girl was fine with that. She didn't care that her new chosen one was a married man, as long as he made her expensive gifts more often. Martha went into the living room and sat down on the sofa. How nice. I don't know why you and I have been staying in hotels so far. You said yourself, the Kikimora is never home during the day. Come here, Arthur. The girl's eyes fell on the home theater and she jumped up from the couch. Cool, let's put some music on with you. Does he boom loudly? What music? The neighbors. What neighbors? It's daytime, and in the daytime you can do anything, even renovate your apartment. Turn on the music. Arthur obeyed the girl's wish, but didn't turn up the volume much. He was afraid that Natalie's neighbors would report how he was having fun in her absence. His wife might find it suspicious. Arthur was not a music lover. The man was stiff, feeling out of place, having brought Martha here. It was unaccustomed. It seemed as if Billy from school would come racing in at any moment. Arthur, why are you so stiff? Martha wrapped her arms around the man. Let's have a drink and relax. After a drink of cognac, the warmth spread through Arthur's body and his thoughts flowed smoothly. No, what am I really doing? Natalie's definitely not coming. In our whole life together, it's never happened that she came home in the daytime for no reason. Billy lives in the country now, and with any luck, he'll stay there forever. I got Natalie to sign the papers, and now that witch is going to take her damn grandson. We can live in peace. Arthur, why don't you show me your bedroom? Martha, interrupting the man's meaning, pulled him by the arm, playfully guiding him with her painted eyes. Arthur smiled, finished the rest of the cognac, and loudly placing the empty glass on the coffee table, allowed himself to be drawn into the bedroom. Wow, Martha exclaimed with delight when she saw the huge bed. She let go of Arthur's hand and sprang onto it. Then, assuming a beautiful pose, she patted the bedspread with her hand. Come here, darling. Now I'm going to thank you for my new phone. My gratitude will be boundless. You'll love it. Those were the words Natalie had heard when she entered the apartment a few minutes ago. She, after signing the custody papers, decided not to go straight to work, but to go home to calm down, to talk to her husband. The couple couldn't hear the sound of the front door opening because of the music playing. The landlady was stunned in the hallway when she saw the young woman's sandals. Even then, Natalie felt a pain of suspicion. She tiptoed toward the bedroom. Her legs were pounding and shaking, but she could make out the words of the young, pretty girl who was sprawled on her bed. A cell phone, huh? Expensive. Natalie said in an icy voice, her outward expression not betraying the storm inside her. Arthur, who instantly became whiter than the wall, found nothing better to do than to mutter a banal phrase. Natalie, you've got it all wrong. What is there to misunderstand? Everything is clear, except where did you get the money for such expensive gifts for this? No matter how hard Natalie tried, she couldn't keep her composure for long and broke into a shrill scream. Get out. Get out of here. Get out of my apartment, both of you. The girl jumped up from the bed and tried to rush past her landlady, but Natalie, eyes burning furiously, clawed at her hair. Arthur stood frozen to the floor, watching his wife dragging Martha across the bedroom floor, pulling at her hair and scratching her face bloody. Natalie gnawed at the pillow with her teeth and howled like a wounded wolf. Her head throbbed like a glowing ball of fire and seemed about to explode with hatred and anger. It hurt. How it hurt. She had given Arthur all of herself. She even stopped fighting for her son, having sent him to his grandmother and signed all the documents for temporary custody. Only if Arthur was happy, only if they were well together and nothing broke their family idyll. And he cheated on her, cheated with a young girl, and dragged her to Natasha's apartment on the family bed. And he has nothing of his own here. He came in his underwear. Natalie dressed him, put on his shoes, bought him a car. And how she loved him. She looked into his mouth and listened to his every word. What a bastard, what a bastard. Natalie's face pressed into the pillow, and she felt her right cheek burning with a huge scratch that was still bleeding. Her opponent, having recovered a little, tried to resist, but that scratch was the only thing she could do to Natalie, who herself ran away all battered, with torn-out gash on her head. When the girl managed to escape Natalie's grasp, she sprinted out of the apartment like a scalded woman, whimpering in pain. Arthur stood in one place, silently watching the beating and making no attempt to intervene. The man feverishly made excuses, although he realized that it was stupid. It was foolish to deny his treason. Now one must ask for forgiveness. Natalie sat on the floor, out of breath, disheveled, with a bleeding cheek. She slowly raised her eyes and looked up into her husband's face. There was silence between them for a few seconds. Arthur was the first to break it. Natalie, forgive me, I beg you. I don't know how it happened. It was like some kind of eclipse. But it's the first time, I swear. And it'll never happen again. Yes, it won't. Natalie nodded, getting up from the floor. You better tell me, what did you give that little girl a cell phone for? As I understand it, she wasn't going to thank you so eagerly for a cheap model, was she? Arthur, who had not expected such a question, was confused. He had nothing to say, and Natalie answered her own question. It's money for the refrigerator, isn't it? The man lowered his head and his wife started screaming again. You bastard, you took the money yourself and blamed it on Billy. And you planted cigarettes on him, just to be sure. How could you do that? Because of this, my son's going to live with his mom. You gave that. A cell phone bought with my money that I earned. You pay for your affairs with my money. Natalie felt like she was going to burst into tears, but she didn't want to do it in front of her cheating boyfriend. so she screamed, "Get out of my apartment! Get out now!" Natalie, Arthur took a step towards his wife and held out his hand. The woman recoiled like a leper. "Go away," I said. "I don't want to see you. Get out." The rest of the day and all night, Natalie sobbed into her pillow, smearing bitter tears and blood from her scratched cheek. In the morning, she could hardly pull herself together to go to work. Nothing was going well for the woman. She couldn't concentrate on work. All her thoughts were only about the affair. That betrayal burned Natalie with fire. And also the incomprehension of what to do now, how to live. All her prosperous and beautiful life was just a picture. Her friends were always jealous of her. How could they admit that her husband had cheated? And Natalie lost her son because of that despicable traitor. With the money Arthur had when he left his wife's apartment, he rented an inexpensive apartment for a month. He had no desire to call or meet Marta. He had lost all interest in her. The affair had no meaning now. In his head, there were only thoughts of the essentials. What to live on now? Get a job? Arthur didn't like working. Begging his wife for forgiveness? Judging by the fire in her eyes when she kicked Arthur out of the house, it was unlikely. Certainly not now. Huddled in a cheap apartment, the man waited a few days, letting Natalie cool down. Then he called. The woman picked up the phone from the third time, and from there Arthur received such a stream of swear words that he realized it was useless to talk about forgiveness. Then he mentioned getting his things back. "What's your stuff?" Natalie yelled. "Where do you see your stuff? I bought it all. You'll get nothing from me, nothing, you hear me? You bastard. Live in what you can carry. I'd rather give your clothes to the homeless." Arthur had almost no money left. He had to make do with pasta. But he wanted to eat good food, like he'd been used to when he lived with Natalie. He wanted to go to a restaurant. What to do? Natalie would probably file for divorce. Maybe he should find himself a new rich lady. The thought of starting all over again made Arthur cringe. How hard it is to woo greedy women. At the very least, you need a decent closet and money for the first time to make a splash. Arthur didn't have that. Looking for a job. "Yeah, I guess there's nowhere to go, so I'll have to get a job." Any job that came along, now was not the time to choose. When Natalie came home from work in the evenings, she hovered around the apartment. There was nothing to occupy herself with. The pain of the affair was still there. If Billy were home, she wouldn't be alone. She could have talked to her son, gone out with him after all. But Arthur had deprived her of that too. Loneliness gnawed at the woman, gnawed from the inside, as well as unrelenting pain. Natalie filed for divorce from Arthur immediately, the next day, after she caught her husband with this girl. And it didn't make her feel any better. The divorce wasn't for another month. It was hard for Natalie to imagine how she would meet Arthur. As long as she didn't get hysterical and curse him, she couldn't do that. It would be a sign of weakness. She must try to remain calm. It seemed to Natalie that her husband would keep trying to contact her, begging for forgiveness. But a week had passed and her husband had called only once, and that was about things. Natalie's mind was filled with horrible images of him living with that girl. It made it all the more painful. Billy liked living in the country. No, not in the country, at his grandmother's. In the city, of course, was better, but there was no grandmother there. Only now the boy was happy when he came home from school. And even if there were not even 10 people in his class, but they were friends, many of whom the boy had made friends with during the summer. And then there was Leslie, unapproachable classmate Leslie, whom Billy didn't know which side to approach, but whom he liked a lot. The girl, like him, had moved to the village from the city, only with her parents. They'd sort of decided to go into farming. Leslie was wary of the local boys, especially Billy, who was known as a bully. But nevertheless, in time, Billy found an approach to the unapproachable girl. All these worries gave Billy's life a special meaning, and he tried to behave more solidly, more mature. When he had a tricky idea in his head, his first thought was, how would his grandmother feel about it? Wouldn't she be upset? Trying not to cause her unnecessary anxiety, so as not to cause another attack of pain in the heart, the boy denied himself many tricks, but this did not make life less interesting. Billy ran home elated. Today, Leslie had let him walk her home. The boys looked at him enviously as Billy walked out of the school building, solidly taking his briefcase from Leslie and carrying it himself. No one teased and taunted Billy, however. The local boys had been respecting the bully friend since the summer for his desperate character. The boy was in such a hurry to tell his grandmother about Leslie that he didn't notice the familiar car peering out of the neighborhood or the raincoat hanging on the wooden rack. It wasn't until he burst into the kitchen that he found his mother drinking tea with a sweet cake. "Billy, hi. Are you here yet?" The woman jerked, intending to get up from her seat, and Billy involuntarily took a step backward. Natalie grimaced and sank back onto the stool. "What are you doing here?" Billy asked gruffly, afraid that his mother might want to take him back to town. "I came to visit you, and I can't." The woman jumped up. "Natalie, don't be so hard on your son. Give him a kiss or something." "It's been a month," Julia frowned. "I don't think Billy's very happy to see me." "What's there to be happy about? The kid hasn't had much fun living with you these last few years." "Well, there's no need to reminisce. Billy, sit down and have some pie while it's warm." "I'll eat at my place," Billy replied. And after he had piled the pie on his plate, he left the kitchen. Natalie looked after her son with resentment. It's okay, Natalie," Julia said softly. "Billy's mad at you, of course, but he's easygoing. You should at least repent to your son. Tell him you found out who took the money. You could apologize to Billy." "I was going to, but he's so..." Natalie shrugged. "So prickly. You should come visit us more often. Billy will come around. Now that you finally opened your eyes to your slicker and kicked him out, life can go differently. I'm not young, and as you know, I'm sick. You get your son's trust back and he'll come back to you. If things work out between you two, I'll be happy. I'm enjoying my life with Billy, though. It's like I'm younger. It wasn't easy being alone." "Yes, it was," Natalie sighed, her eyes downcast. "But don't worry, being alone is good for you. You've realized what your husband is, and thank God. What's going on with the divorce, by the way? Are you free?" "No, Mom. Arthur didn't show up in court. The divorce has been postponed for a month." "What do you mean, postponed? What's that all of a sudden? You have no children together, nothing to divide. You could have insisted if you wanted to. Are you getting soft again?" "I'm not soft. We'll be divorced in a month. I might have wanted him to show up at the trial. I wanted to see his brazen eyes, but I'll see it in a month. Then we'll be divorced." "Mom, I came to get Billy. I wanted to take him home, and he's running away from me like hell." "What did you want him to do?" "Not all at once. You hurt your son. You hurt him bad. He suffered because of you. The boy's heart is ice-crusted and needs time to thaw. Take a leave of absence from work. Live with us for a while, and your son will be drawn to you." "I don't know. I'll think about it. Maybe after the divorce." Natalie left her mother with a heavy heart. Only at the last moment she took Vanya's things out of the car, hoping that she wouldn't have to leave them behind. She'd hoped to return to the city with her son. But Billy showed his unwillingness to communicate with his mother, and Natalie was unable to apologize to her son for the unfounded suspicion of money theft, though she had come here with that very intention. But she couldn't speak when she looked at her son, who was as prickly as a hedgehog. The woman left the village in the morning. This time she had come here by car. It was a long way back. Getting here, Natalie had imagined that she and Billy would drive home together and discuss many things on the way. But it didn't happen. As Natalie left the house, Billy came out too. It was time for him to go to school. The woman awkwardly, sideways approached her son and kissed him on the cheek for the first time in a long time. Billy let his mother do it, but afterward, he ran straight to school, remembering to wave goodbye to his grandmother. Natalie had a difficult journey home. Ahead of her was an empty apartment and anguish for Arthur. No matter how hard she tried to get her husband out of her mind, she couldn't do it. Waking up in the morning and falling asleep at night, she thought of him, alone in a cold bed. Somehow the pleasant moments came to mind, evenings together, his tenderness in the bedroom, coffee in bed in the morning, which her husband sometimes spoiled Natalie with. The memories of the affair still pained Natalie deeply. There were still unanswered questions. Did Arthur ever love her? Or had he lived with Natalie because it was convenient? Was it a one-time affair, or was the cheating systematic? And Natalie was also very much concerned about who her husband was living with now, alone or with this girl of his. It tormented the woman to such an extent that she could not stand it and turned to a private detective. She hired him to find out where and with whom her husband was living. She couldn't just call Arthur, and he didn't call, which pissed Natalie off. When the detective reported back a couple of days later, Natalie exhaled with satisfaction when she learned that Arthur lived alone in a rented apartment. And what's more, the man had gone to work. He had taken a job as a sales consultant in an appliance store. It wasn't easy work, but Natalie was happy about it. The divorce trial was coming up, and Natalie hoped Arthur would show up this time. Then she could look him in the eye. As much as Arthur's whole being resisted it, he had to get a job. There was nothing to live on. At the appliance store he'd taken a job at, the manager was a woman. Of course, she was not a match for Natalie in terms of income, and she was older, but she was unmarried. Arthur was in no position to choose. He tried to make a move on the principal. The man didn't go to the divorce court either. He didn't care about it at the time. He was diligently working on his principal, and the woman seemed to give in. Arthur in his thoughts was already living off her. But unfortunately for the man, their romance ended on the first trip to the restaurant. Arthur habitually expected that the wealthy lady will pay the bill, and the woman frowned upon hearing such hints. She still had to pay, because Arthur did not have the necessary amount, and he ordered himself at the same time, not shy in the choice of dishes. After this meeting, the director of the store did not want to look in the direction of Arthur, quickly recognizing him as an Alfonso. The man was afraid that now he had only a few days left to work in this store. Arthur blamed himself for the fact that living with Natalie, he completely lost his grip. His debts were piling up, and the rich ladies wouldn't take his bait. In the end, Arthur completely despaired. The only way out of the situation was to try to get Natalie back, even if it meant humiliation. Several times, after an unsuccessful trip to the restaurant with the director, Arthur wanted to go to Natalie to wait for her at the entrance to crawl at her feet. But the man restrained himself from doing so. He should give her time, let her realize how hard it was for her to be alone. It is unlikely that at this age, unsympathetic Natalie has a chance to find a new life partner. She must understand that. Arthur prepared for the court appearance with great care. He tidied up his hair and dressed up, using the money he had borrowed again. The man came to the court an hour before the appointed time. He walked around the building, intending to catch Natalie on the street. And there she was. Arthur saw his wife's cheeks flush when she spotted him getting out of the car. Yep, so she cares. She still cares. Arthur quickly concocted a pained expression on his face. Natalie slowly walked up the steps to her husband standing by the door and didn't know how to start a conversation. But she didn't have to. He spoke on his own. Natalie, Arthur held out his arms to the woman as if he wanted to hug her, but immediately lowered them, pulling himself away. I've missed you, Natalie. Why didn't you come to the first meeting? Natalie asked, trying to appear indifferent. I couldn't divorce you, and I can't even now. How could I ruin our love for a fleeting mistake? I love you. I've always loved you. I've been a little weak. It's okay. Can one stupid mistake ruin all our happy years? Stupidity? Is that what you call it? If I loved you, I wouldn't have brought that girl into our apartment. When you love, you don't look at others. I did when I lived with you. Who needs you? Flashed through the man's mind as he executed the pre-planned move. 1 minute of embarrassment is worth a further contented, prosperous life. The man sank to his knees, right on the dirty tiles on the threshold of the courthouse. He clasped his face with his hands, pretending that tears were flowing. I'm sorry, Natalie. I can't do this without you. I can't do this at all. I'm dying. Arthur whispered, watching the woman's reaction through his fingers. And that's when the real tears started to flow, not from Arthur, but from Natalie. Stop it. Get up. She reached out her hand to her husband. Get up, please. Let's go to the car. We'll talk there. As a result, neither Natalie nor Artur showed up for this court hearing. Passers-by looked back in amazement at the car in which the couple were kissing in broad daylight. Natalie did not return to work that day. She and her husband had gone home together. Their home. There were tears of forgiveness, passionate confessions, and a day spent in the bedroom. Arthur swore that he would never look at anyone else in his life but his beloved. Natalie was hesitant to tell her mother that she had reconciled with Arthur, knowing her reaction. It was only when Julia told her daughter on the phone that she and Billy were going into town to buy stationery that Natalie had to confess. "You're a fool, Natalie. You're so stupid. You think you've got your head on straight, but you're back to your old ways. You need to regain your son's trust. He asked about you the other day. I thought you realized what your husband is like. I don't even know how to tell Billy about your reconciliation. The boy's gonna be upset again. He thought we'd be in town on vacation, staying with you." Julia said, and hung up the phone. Time flew by, and now the grown-up Billy is finishing ninth grade. He had to decide on his future education, and he didn't want to leave his grandmother alone. They had been through a lot over the years, and Julia's health was noticeably failing. The ambulance came to them more and more often, and Julia was hospitalized several times. Billy never regretted for a moment that he had chosen to live here in the village. The school years had been happy, except for the frustrations of his grandmother's health. At the school prom, Billy was the most conspicuous boy in his new suit. Mom had made sure, as she had all those years ago, that she continued to dress her son well, as if to make amends. And she and Grandma didn't need money, thanks to Natalie. Billy flatly refused to stay in town, not wanting to spend a single day with his stepfather. In the assembly hall, decorated with posters and balloons, a beautiful girl walked in with Billy, and all the boys in the village, and not only the village boys, were looking at her. But it was only from the moment she arrived in the village that Leslie became friends with Billy, and by the ninth grade, this friendship had grown into something more. As Leslie twirled in the graduation waltz, she smiled at Billy, but he wasn't very cheerful. "Billy, what's the matter? Why are you always frowning?" Leslie asked her friend right after the dance. "Today, we have such a day. We've been looking forward to it." "Yes, we've been looking forward to it," Billy replied cheerfully. "Of course we did, don't mind me. The more I realize how hard it is for me to leave my grandmother alone." "So, have you decided where you're going to go?" "Yeah, I guess so. I'm going to be an auto mechanic. It's easier for you. You've been wanting to be a teacher for a long time." "I like cars and I like to work on them." "Are we going to see a lot of you in town?" Leslie was smiling. "Every day. That's a given. My mom insists that I live with my stepdad. It's kind of unseemly for me to live in a dorm when she has an apartment like this. I don't want to." "Billy, a mom's a mom. Maybe she was wrong about something. It's time to let it go. It's really stupid to live in a dorm." It was with great reluctance that Billy went into his mother's apartment. He went there with his belongings, intending to live there for the duration of his college education. As the boy had planned, he enrolled as an automobile mechanic. This profession was really interesting to him. Although his mother repeatedly offered Billy to live with her, the guy was still more inclined to the dormitory. But he was talked out of it by his grandmother, whose opinion he listened to. "Billy, why do you need a dormitory? Your mother has a large apartment. You will have the same room in which you lived before. Your family for all intents and purposes, and it's time to stop drifting apart. It's time to socialize. I'm not a girl anymore, and my health, well, you know how it is. When I'm gone, Mom will be the only person you'll have left." Billy cringed at his grandmother's words. He hated it when she talked about the time when she would be gone. The boy didn't even want to think about it. Billy, of course, could not know that his mother had not on her own initiative offered her son to live with her, for Arthur was strongly against it. The husband even tried to scandalize about it. It was Julia said to her daughter that her son should live at home and not dormitories, while having a mother with a large apartment. And so Billy unwillingly returned to the house from which he had so gladly moved a few years before. Arthur didn't see fit to say hello to the stepson. The man mumbled something like, "Here he is, nobody missed me." With that, he strode defiantly into his and Natalie's bedroom. Billy went to make himself comfortable in his old room. And from there he heard his stepfather behind the wall, not even trying to muffle his voice, telling his mother, "You're here. That's the end of our quiet life. Why did you bring him here? He would have been fine in the dormitory." Billy couldn't hear his mother's excuses. She answered her husband quietly. That's why the boy never knew that his grandmother insisted on his living here, sincerely wishing that his mother and son had finally found a common language. Billy, by habit developed in the village, woke up early in the morning. There were still a couple of days left before classes at the technical school, But today, Leslie was to come to town. The girl was enrolled in teacher training and was going to rent an apartment with two of her friends. Billy wanted to meet his girlfriend and help her settle in. Billy was brushing his teeth in the bathroom when he heard a high-pitched conversation coming from the open kitchen door. "Natalie, what is this? What are you leaving me these cents for? I don't even have enough for lunch at the cafeteria. I was gonna change the oil in my car today. And the grenade is rattling, so I'm gonna have it serviced. Arthur, you know very well about my problems at work." Natalie exhaled tiredly. "I don't know how much I'll get paid this month. I've already been told that it will be much less than before, but I still have to figure out how much less. Let's do something about it. Maybe the service can wait." Natalie had never held a managerial position, but she was top-notch in her field. In addition, she could easily fill in for a translator and occasionally did the bookkeeping. The owner of the company Natalie worked for appreciated her abilities and diligence and expressed it financially. Only recently, to Natalie's dismay, he decided to move abroad and sold his company. Natalie did not get on well with the new owner. His eyes widened when he saw Natalie's salary. The man immediately said that he would not pay that much, and if a woman didn't like something, no one would keep her. Natalie tried many times to convey this to Arthur, but her husband didn't want to hear her and cut back on his spending. "No, I can't do that. If you can't maintain our old lifestyle, I'll have to get a job. You're the one who keeps resisting it. Yes, I'll get a job. I'll work in a cab. I'll work day and night. So what if I don't see you much, but I won't have to beg you for money? I'll have my own." That's it, Arthur." Natalie raised her hands in a conciliatory manner. "Take it. How much do you need for this service?" The woman dreaded these conversations Arthur was having about work, especially when he started to say that he would be a taxi driver at night. Who would he be driving around? Drunk girls. At the mere thought of it in the woman's head drew terrible pictures of how these girls seduce her beloved. And they would, because he was so handsome. In the end, Natalie, with a heavy heart, again laid out the amount that her husband demanded, realizing that now it is not affordable for her. It was this scene that Billy entered the kitchen. He said good morning and started frying eggs for breakfast. Natalie had run off to work and Arthur and Billy were the only ones left in the kitchen. There was an awkward silence between them. Arthur sat at the table and hurriedly finished the rest of his coffee, catching disapproving glances from his stepson. Billy, who had grown up a long time ago and looked at many things differently, couldn't stand it any longer. "What? Are you still taking money from your mom? Don't you want to go to work? What are you, a puppy dog? Don't stick your nose where you're not wanted. Don't come into the kitchen while I'm here. You're acting a little bossy. You'll be out of here in no time." The guy expected something like that. He turned off the gas under the frying pan and, slowly wiping his hands with a kitchen towel, turned to his stepfather. There was an acerbic grin on Billy's face. Arthur's face changed several times as Billy approached him. Not only was the boy half a head taller than the man, but it was obvious he didn't neglect exercise, judging by the width of the shoulders and the lumpy muscles in his arms. Billy, almost gently, took his stepfather by the neck and pulled him upward, forcing him to his feet. Arthur made no attempt at resistance. His arms were hanging limply along his body, fear in his eyes. The boy brought his face close to his stepfather's and, looking down at him, said, "That was the last time I heard you say such words to me. If I hear you say it again, you're on your own. I'll break your arms and legs, and you can tell your mom that you fell, unless you want to get hurt more. And about me staying here, you didn't invite me, and this apartment isn't yours. Besides, this apartment was bought by my grandmother, so I have every right to live here, but you're nobody and your name is nothing. From now on, you're the one who's going to be quiet in my presence." Billy loosened his hand around Arthur's throat, and he jerked aside. The boy, smiling calmly, asked, "Do you understand? Did you hear me?" Yes. The man nodded cowardly, not looking Billy in the face. Although hatred raged in him, he realized he couldn't physically handle Billy. He was not the same boy who had left this apartment like a cornered animal a few years ago. Far from it. Since Billy's return to his mother's apartment, many things have changed, particularly Arthur's behavior. The man had become much quieter and no longer demanded the same amount of money from his wife. but was content with what she gave him. In addition, Natalie noticed that Arthur was no longer knighting her stepson. On the contrary, he seemed to leave the room as soon as Billy entered. The woman could not get Arthur to tell her what was going on for a long time. The husband kept his mouth shut, and then one day he exploded. "Your son is no longer a troubled teenager. No, he's a criminal, a real criminal, and you mark my word, he'll end up badly." When Arthur shouted all this in his wife's face, they were in the apartment alone. But at his last words, there was the sound of a key being turned in the lock. It was Billy returning from school. Arthur stopped abruptly. Natalie couldn't get another word out of her husband. She didn't try very hard. Everything suited her, in principle. The house was quiet. Her husband was quiet. Billy, in fact, rarely showed up. If anything, he only came to stay the night. He spent all his free time either with his girlfriend or working part-time. All Natalie could get from her son was for him to tell her what his girlfriend's name was and where she went to school. He refused to bring Leslie here and introduce her to his mom. On the one hand, Natalie didn't care. The woman was having problems at work. The new owner of the company was knighting her, and with each new knighting, he reduced her salary. Natalie had even considered changing jobs, but other places could not offer her half of what she had received under the previous owner. Only now did Natalie realize that the owner had really considered her a valuable employee by paying her so much money. The quality of life in the family had deteriorated considerably. Arthur frowned, but kept quiet, and he didn't mention going to work anymore, being satisfied with little. In fact, the man was waiting for Billy to leave the house. He wouldn't stay here forever, after all. He had 3 years of schooling, and maybe something would happen sooner. Maybe he'd get married. Arthur hated Billy, but he couldn't help it. The boy had scared his stepfather pretty badly the first day he got here. Billy was almost happy. His studies were easy, maybe because he'd gone where he wanted to go. They saw Leslie every day. Why wasn't Billy completely happy? It was because of his grandmother, who he went to visit every weekend. She was getting weaker and weaker. Frequent hospitalizations didn't help either. Doctors had long ago given up, saying that with such a diagnosis, Julia still lived quite a long time. In the beginning, they had much worse prognosis, and only Julia herself knew why she'd lived so long, or thanks to whom. When she took her grandson, she'd given herself the idea that she had to live. She had to get her grandson back on his feet. The woman piously believed that she had survived for so many years only because of that. By the end of Vanya's studies, the young people began to think about marriage, knowing that the guy immediately after graduation will be taken into the army. Leslie had 1 more year left in the pedagogical school. They thought for a long time, weighed all the pros and cons, and finally came to the conclusion that the wedding is better to play after the army. "Are you sure you'll wait for me?" Billy liked to ask his girlfriend, jokingly, but actually a little worried. Leslie took offense. "Billy, will you stop it? I'd wait for you even if I was in the army for 5 years. I'd wait for you for the rest of my life. Don't ever ask me that question again." Billy was only 3 months away from the end of school when Billy got an unexpected call from his grandmother's roommate in the middle of the week. "Billy, come over. Julia won't get up." The neighbor had called Billy during the couples class. Billy snapped out of it, not remembering to mumble to the class teacher about Grandma. She only nodded her head. "Go, Billy, of course go." The boy was late for the train, so he didn't hesitate to call a cab. Billy had money. He'd been working part-time at the car service since his freshman year, saving up for his wedding. Julia was lying on the bed with the blanket up to her chin. His heart sank when he saw how gaunt and small his grandmother had become. And the look, how different that clouded gaze was from his grandmother's usual sharp gaze. "Grandma, what are you doing? Why are you scaring me so much? Why are you lying down?" "That's it, Billy. I don't have the strength to get up anymore." The woman spoke softly, with a gasp. Billy went out to his grandmother's neighbor, also an old woman, who was tending to Julia's kitchen. "Here, I'm making Julia some soup. She's more of a liquor person these days." "Did the doctor come to see Grandma?" "What did he say?" "What did he say?" said the neighbor. "He said it's useless to hospitalize her. Our Julia will never get up again, and then, as God wills it, maybe a week, maybe a year. No one knows." Grandma needs care, Billy. I've been working on it for a couple days, but I can't do it. I'm not young. And my husband's nagging me about running my own place. Billy had a lump in his throat. He wanted to tear and throw, wanted to cut off a piece of his heart and put it in his grandmother's chest so that she would get out of bed and live a long time. She met him at the end of the street, looking out into the distance with her keen eyes. Natalie had gotten another reprimand from her boss and was already pretty pissed off. And then there was Billy, calling and calling, even though she dropped his calls. The disgruntled chief growled at the woman. "Who's calling you during working hours? Go answer it. There must be something more important than work." As she left the office, Natalie irritably called her son back. "Billy, if I'm picking up the phone, I can't talk. What is it?" "Mom, I brought Grandma over. She's out sick." It took Natalie a while to realize what her son was saying. "What do you mean? You brought her here? What do you mean she's sick? What is she, a bedridden woman now?" "Yeah, I'm telling you, Grandma needs care. She can't get up. Who in the village will look after her? I hired a car and we moved her here." Natalie ran out of work without even asking to leave. She imagined the look on Arthur's face. As it turned out, she had no idea. Arthur stood there like he'd been struck by thunder. "What is this, Natalie? What's going on? It's not enough we have your son. He's brought his sick grandmother. Who's gonna take care of her?" At that moment, Billy came out of the room where he had put his grandmother. Natalie, not answering her husband, immediately attacked her son. "Really, Billy? What were you thinking when you made that decision? Why didn't you ask me? I'm at work all day. Who's going to take care of me? Maybe you won't join the army. We should hire a nurse." "With what kind of money?" Arthur got upset. Yes, Natalie supported her husband. "Actually, Billy, you know money's not what it used to be. Why should I have to pay for a caregiver?" "Mom, I've been saving up for the wedding. You know I've been working part-time. I can pay for the first time with this money. After all, how much do you give your hubby every day? A caregiver costs a lot less." Big tears streamed down Julia's face. The hired nurse left the door of the room where the old woman was lying half open. So Julia heard the whole conversation between her daughter and her husband from word to word. "How much longer are we going to put up with your mother in our apartment? Can you smell it? Can you smell it? It stinks in here. It stinks of old age, medicine, urine. Our house has become an almshouse. I can't take it anymore." "Don't exaggerate, please. The nurse is very careful. There's no odor." "You don't say." "Yes, there is. You can't smell it. You're not in the apartment all day like me. Besides, there's a stranger in here all the time. I'm telling you, let's put your mother in a nursing home. She'll be fine there. They take care of people like her." "Arthur, how do you envision that?" "Billy's only been in the army a week and he's paid for 3 months worth of care. What am I gonna tell them when he calls?" "Don't say anything. You tell them it's okay. You don't have to tell that felon everything. And we'll cancel the caregiver's contract and give him his money back." Julia, even lying in bed in this room, felt the change in her son-in-law's behavior with the departure of Billy in the army. The man at once began to press his wife, some of it raising his voice at her. He reproached Natalie for not earning enough, and every night he berated her for having a bedridden mother in their apartment. The conversation continued, and Julia noticed with alarm that her daughter was beginning to give in. "Well, I don't know, Arthur. I don't know. Maybe you're right. Maybe Mom would be better off in a nursing home. But it's not like it's a quick fix. We have to find the right place. We have to do the paperwork." As soon as Natalie said those words, it turned out that her husband had already made the arrangements. "I'd already found everything. Here, look." The man grabbed his phone and began to point the open internet page in Natalie's face. "See, it's a government institution. It's paid for out of the patient's pension, and I found a list of documents too. If you want, you can get them together in a few days." "It's not even in our town," Natalie exclaimed. "It would take at least 8 hours by car." "So?" Arthur asked in bewilderment. "So what? With my job, I won't be able to visit my mom. The chief is already nagging me. You know what my workload is. Why would you visit her? Did you visit her in the village? She's just an old woman lying there." "I don't know," Natalie said doubtfully. Even Julia, hearing the conversation, realized that her daughter had already made up her mind. And when Billy would call his mom, "She's still in her right mind, then I won't be able to hide anything from him." Don't give the old lady your cell phone with you. What she wanted for in a nursing home. There's no need for her to call. The staff will call us without her. That's the staff mom can ask for the phone. Natalie, are you kidding me? Do you really think the old lady can remember Vanya's number by heart in her condition? Julia wiped the tears running down her cheeks in exasperation. And that's where the son-in-law is very wrong. She remembered her grandson's number even in her sleep, and she wasn't about to forget it. She had a heart problem, not a head problem. But at the same time, Julia realized she wouldn't call Billy and complain. Why? What could he do being in the army? He'd just get nervous, twitchy. Let him serve in peace. A nursing home is a nursing home. On the one hand, it might be better than here, listening to Arthur's constant tantrums and seeing his daughter's slanted glances. Billy was lucky. Thanks to his excellent physical training, he got to serve in the airborne troops. I must say, the guy himself dreamed of it and asked at the military enlistment office. The service didn't seem like fun. At first, it was very hard. Daily marching, training. In the evening, Billy would get so exhausted that he'd fall on the bed and pass out without a backward glance. Remembering to call Leslie and his grandmother. The only phones allowed in the unit were simple, push-button phones. They could be used once a day in the evenings, only for communication with relatives. But for some reason lately, dialing his grandmother, the guy heard short beeps. So Billy dialed his mom. "What's up with Grandma?" "Nothing, just the same old thing," Natalie answered reluctantly. "Yeah, we disconnected her phone. She's weakened and has trouble talking." "No, Billy, I can't put her on the phone right now. I'm at home." After talking to his mom, Billy was left with the lingering residue. Mom's not telling the truth. Her slurred voice and reluctance to talk about his grandmother. These concerns Billy shared with his girlfriend in a phone conversation. Leslie was not lazy and went to Billy's house, although the girl did not want to meet his mother. But the girl herself was strongly attached to Julia, in front of whose eyes Leslie's school years had passed. Besides, Billy was nervous, and she wanted to calm him down by telling him that everything was all right with his grandmother. It didn't work. Vanya's mom and stepfather did not let Leslie into the apartment. "What kind of inspections are these?" Natalie asked arrogantly. "It's not an inspection. I just wanted to visit Julia," Leslie said, confused by the woman's appraising gaze. "There's no need to visit her. Her mom's weak and not ready for visits." Natalie cut her off and slammed the door in Tanya's face. When Billy found out about it, he had a big fight with his mother on the phone, but there was nothing he could do. The unit in which he served was located far away from his hometown. It was unrealistic to go there and back for a leave of absence. So the guy served, content with his mother's reluctant excuses, without contact with his grandmother. Billy served almost half a year, becoming stronger and tougher. In the evenings, the boy was no longer falling off his feet as he had been during his first tour of duty. One evening, when there was still half an hour of free time left before lights out, he decided to call Leslie as usual and turned on his simple phone. This phone was supposed to be off all day long. Before he could dial Leslie, a message from the service provider popped up on the screen. 12 missed calls from an unknown number. At first, Billy wanted to ignore the text message, but then something niggled in his chest. 12 missed calls. Someone wanted to call very badly. What if it was from Grandma? Billy was right to suggest that. "Oh, it's Billy, isn't it?" The voice on the phone was a woman's voice, not old. "I was the one who called you today for your grandmother. She's bad, real bad. She feels like she doesn't have long to live, and she'd like to say goodbye to you. There must be some mistake. You've made a mistake. Why didn't Mom call me herself? Who are you?" "I'm a nurse at the nursing home where your grandmother is. I don't know about your mom, but I've never seen her here. And Julia's been here 5 months. Vanya's hand holding the phone began to shake. With his other hand, he clutched his head. "It's a mistake, the guy mumbled. "It can't be. My grandmother can't be in a nursing home." The head of the unit looked at the serviceman standing before him with bewilderment. "What vacation? What week? What are you talking about? You are not entitled to it yet. At most, a weekend leave." "I need it." Billy was stubborn. I don't know who needs what. Where's your company now? Getting ready to jump? Why aren't you with them? Get back to your man. You won't let me go, I'll run away, Billy said desperately. Court-martial me, do what you want, but I'll run away. The chief of the unit only now noticed the state of morale of this soldier. Desperation, close to hysteria. Well, he said, tell me what happened. When Billy, in a broken voice, told about the call from the nursing home, the man with the military bearing looked at him carefully. That's where you should have started. Do you think we're not human beings here? The chief opened his desk drawer with a jerk and pulled out a blank form and began to write on it. 5 minutes later, Billy was already skipping out of his office, clutching the form tightly. Just make it, just in time. The boy repeated to himself like an incantation. Grandma, wait for me, I'm coming. Julia was buried in her native village. Billy was in charge of transporting the body and organizing the funeral. It was a dreary, rainy day. The sky had been overcast since morning. The rain poured and poured, seemingly unwilling to stop at all. The very sky itself is crying for Julia, muttered a neighbor, standing in a tight bunch of villagers. The villagers had all come, despite the inclement weather. Julia was respected and loved here. Billy stood straight as a taut string with his head uncovered. Streams dripped from his short hair, mingling with tears. The boy watched stunned as the red velvet-covered coffin was lowered into the damp black pit. Nearby, huddled tightly together and holding Billy's hand, stood Leslie. She was sobbing at the top of her voice, as were many of the villagers. Natalie was the only one who couldn't squeeze out a tear, standing all alone, apart from everyone else. She shrouded herself in her drenched cloak and looked out from under her umbrella, irritated at Julia's morning sky. The villagers looked at her with distaste, and her son's gaze burned with hatred. Natalie felt uncomfortable under the stairs and wished only for it to be over. It would have been better if she hadn't come at all, but that would have been unseemly. Not a single person from the locals moved from their seats until the very end. It was only when the last wreath was laid on the earthen mound that people began to slowly disperse. They wandered on, talking quietly, remembering the deceased with kind words. Billy, supported by Leslie, was the last to leave. The girl stroked his wet sleeve and repeated, "It's all right, Billy. Grandma's had it. She's all right now. It's good you had time to say goodbye." Yes, Billy did, or rather Grandma, thanks to something strange that had sustained her all these years, was able to wait for her grandson. She was able to wait until the last thing she saw was her favorite face. And Billy had time to say thank you to his grandmother for having her. She had given him the happy years of his life, and that it was only thanks to her that he didn't drink and do drugs in some boarding school. I love you, Grandma. You've changed the way I look at life. I was a troubled teenager, and you changed that. You were never a troubled teenager, Julia whispered, breathing heavily. It's your mother who's difficult, and that's my fault. You were always a good, kind, mischievous boy. I have no regrets. I've lived a long enough life as it is. It's just a shame you and Leslie didn't get married. She's a good girl. Take care of her. Grandma died quietly in her sleep, and Billy couldn't let go of her cold hand for a long time. Returning from the cemetery to his grandmother's house, where everything reminded him of his loved one, where the best years of his life had passed, Billy ran into his mother. By all appearances, she was waiting for him. Billy, trying to speak confidently, turned to her son Natalie. I wanted to talk to you. When you get out of the service, where are you going to go? Back to this house. That's what you're worried about, Mom. This house. Will I come back to you? I wanted to talk to you too, but about something else. How dare you send Grandma to a nursing home? What was I supposed to do? The nurse only worked until 6:00 p.m., and I sometimes worked longer than that. I just didn't have the physical strength to get up at night. Arthur and I decided that a special place would be better for Mom. You and Arthur decided, Billy shouted. Leslie, who had gone into another room so as not to interfere with the conversation between mother and son, quickly came back and, with a calming gesture, took the boy's hand. But Billy continued to scream. So you decided that? Have you been in that outhouse yourself? Did you even realize where you put your grandmother? Did you see the conditions there? The only normal person there was the nurse. The rest of the staff is rude and insensitive. The stench is unbearable. The care of the bedridden is done out of hand. I am bitter to tears that my grandmother spent her last days in such conditions. She didn't deserve it. What does she care? Natalie snapped at her. She was lying down anyway. A difference, you say? A huge difference. Maybe Grandma would have lived longer at home, and maybe she would have waited for me to get out of the army. I'd have taken her. I wouldn't have left her with you for a minute. You. Billy gulped for air, holding back sobs. I used to try to make excuses for you, thinking it was Arthur who was leading you astray. I don't think that anymore. I don't know who's worse, you or your husband. Grandma and I were always strangers to him and he behaved accordingly. But you, Grandma wasn't a stranger to you. I've forgiven you for a lot of things, Mom. I forgave your dislike of me, your unfounded accusations. I even forgave you when you rejected me. But I can't forgive your grandmother. Do you hear me? I will never forgive you for Grandma. What are you even doing here? In the house of the man you betrayed? Get out of here. You have no right to be here. Billy, what are you doing? Natalie howled. Where am I going now? In the middle of the night, in this weather. I'm not gonna make it into town till morning. I was thinking of spending the night. Don't even think about it. Go away, I said. Billy took a step toward his mother with a glint in his eye that frightened the woman. No, she knew her son wouldn't raise a hand against her, but that hatred glittering in his eyes. Without another word, Natalie ran out of the house into the still raining rain. She remembered that she had forgotten her umbrella, but she didn't go back for it. Covering her head with the palms of her hands, she ran to the car, knee-deep in mud. Slamming the car door behind her, Natalie pulled some tissues out of the glove compartment and began wiping her wet face. She looked angrily at the windows of the house and hissed, "You're being bossy, son. And this house is not yours. It will be inherited by me as my daughter. After the army, you'll have nowhere to go back to. That's when we'll see how you'll sing." "We should sell the apartment," Arthur told Natalie confidently. "You have serious problems with your head. You need a good examination." Natalie, despite the terrible headache, jerked sharply. "Are you out of your mind? The apartment is all we have left. The car's gone. After the accident, it's beyond repair." Natalie had been in an accident that rainy night after her mother's funeral, driving home on a wet road, angry at her son, freaking out and hitting the gas. The woman lost control and went off the road. The car flipped several times, but strangely enough, Natalie herself was hardly injured. The hospital found no serious injuries to the woman. But after that, Natalie began to have severe headaches, the cause of which could not be found by any doctor. They all had their hands full, and the headaches were getting worse and worse. Natalie became distracted and could not cope with her usual work. Eventually, the woman was fired. In principle, she had expected it long ago from her always dissatisfied boss. He only needed an excuse, and here it was. Finding herself without a job, the woman realized with horror that she and Arthur have nothing to live on. All her accounts had long since been emptied, and she was unable to find a new job in such a state. Natalie was on strong painkillers. Nevertheless, when her husband talked about selling the apartment, Natalie was indignant. "No, why?" The man shrugged. "It can't go on like this. You need to find out what's causing your pain. You need to be examined at a paid clinic. We'll live in rented accommodation for a few months. Nothing terrible will happen. Then you'll inherit, sell your mother's house, cash in her savings, and buy another apartment. You've read how much houses in this village are worth now." As it turned out, real estate in Julia's village, and especially land plots, were in demand and fetching a decent price. The village became popular with oligarchs. They built their mansions for summer houses, and the land was bought up by a local farmer who started to expand. The farmer was the father, which Natalie couldn't know, of course, not being interested in her son's girlfriend. Natalie was counting on that inheritance. In addition to the house, Julia had some cash savings. As long as she was feeling well, she planted her huge plot of land with onions and gave the crops away in bulk every year. A long time ago, it was with this hard-earned money that Julia bought an apartment for her then-pregnant daughter. But after that, Natalie knew that her mother had also continued to sell onions. Natalie wondered if the only way out was to sell the apartment. There was nothing to live on, and these headaches were driving her crazy. Perhaps a good, paid clinic could determine the cause. Arthur, who persuaded his wife to sell the apartment, had his own selfish intentions. First of all, he wanted to get at least some money out of it. At least part of it, for the first time. This is in the first place, and in the second, another girlfriend of Arthur got pregnant and demanded from him money for abortion and moral compensation. She demanded it harshly, threatening that otherwise she would go to Natalie and tell her everything about their relationship. Arthur was going to leave the now moneyless Natalie anyway, but not right now. First, he would have to persuade her to sell the apartment and wait for the inheritance to get a piece of it. After a while, Natalie gave in to her husband's entreaties and agreed to sell the apartment. She didn't care anymore, as long as she could only start to be examined sooner, to find out what was happening to her. A good apartment, not far from the city center, sold quickly. The money from the deal was transferred to Natalie's card, the PIN code of which Arthur had known for a long time. The first thing, the man decided to get rid of the annoying friend, blackmailing him. He would only give her money for an abortion, without moral compensation. Early in the morning, Arthur and Natalie left a small rented apartment, which they rented, paying for a couple of months in advance. They drove to the clinic for a consultation. When they got there, Arthur left the woman waiting outside the doctor's office, telling her he was going to get a coffee. The man left the clinic and dialed Maddie, who he had only been seeing for 2 months. She was the one who threatened the man with her pregnancy. Arranging to meet near the clinic, Arthur went there on foot. Maddie stood near the entrance to the hypermarket with a disgruntled expression on her face. "I hope you didn't just pull me out of work for nothing. Did you get the money?" "Only for the abortion." Arthur cut me off. "No moral compensation. I will not pay you." The girl grimaced. "Aren't you afraid I'll go to your wife? Then you will not get this money. Either you take the money for the abortion and disappear from my life, or you get nothing. Go to your wife. Go wherever you want. I'm gonna divorce her soon anyway." Maddie thought that Arthur probably wasn't lying. He didn't care about his wife. She'd realized that a long time ago. If he didn't screw her over, she should take at least the amount he was offering. Arthur didn't realize that Maddie was a fraud. When she said she came home from work, she was lying. The girl had never worked a day in her life. She toured the cities and scammed rich suckers out of their money using her looks. You could say that Arthur had stumbled upon a copy of himself, only in female form. At first, fashionably dressed and looking after himself, Arthur seemed to Maddie rich Pinocchio. And when she realized that he is the same as herself, the girl decided that from a lousy sheep at least a piece of wool, and lied about the pregnancy. "Does this store have an ATM? Do you know?" "Come on, let's go and see." Arthur hurried Maddie, wanting to get rid of her as quickly as possible. The ATM stood right in front of the exit of the hypermarket. The girl was hanging around while Arthur was withdrawing money and saw the PIN code he was entering. Suddenly, a crazy idea appeared in Maddie's head. Why? She'd wasted 2 months of her life on this jerk. In that time, she could have hooked up with a normal daddy. This guy's just throwing her a pathetic handout. Especially since Maddie was going to leave this town anyway, and Arthur doesn't know anything about her except a fake name. The girl watched carefully as Arthur slipped the card into his wallet with a careless gesture and put it in the pocket of his fancy coat. "You know what, Arthur?" Maddie sang softly. "I'm sorry about what happened between us. I liked you a lot." The girl took a step towards the man and hugged him, whispering languidly in his ear, "Goodbye, I had a good time with you." At the same time, Maddie's nimble fingers fumbled in the pocket of his coat. Arthur returned to the clinic. The office where Natalie had been sitting before was empty, so the woman had gone in for counseling. "I can't wait for this to be over," sighed Arthur heavily. "I'm so sick of that fool Natalie. Brainless, even lost her job. I'll wait for the inheritance and divorce her at once." The man sat down near the office, determined to wait. It didn't take long to wait. After about 5 minutes, an anxious Natalie came out of the office with the telephone in her hands. "Arthur, what's going on?" "I was talking to the doctor, and the alerts on my phone kept beeping. I couldn't believe it at first. Look, my card is being charged. Alleged ATM withdrawals." "Arthur, where's the card? You have it, right?" When Natalie and Artur entered the hypermarket where the ATM was, Artur was nervous. They had come here for a reason. They had a police officer with them. and they were on their way to look at the surveillance tapes. Arthur, to himself, cursed Maddie with the last words. Not only had she stolen the card, but she'd had the good sense to withdraw the cash right here, as they say, without leaving the cash register. By the time of withdrawal, it was obvious that the girl waited only for Arthur to come out of the door and again rushed to the same ATM. The trio went into the security room, where the monitors were shining brightly. They were receiving video from all the cameras installed in the huge hypermarket. The guard nodded his head in agreement upon hearing the policeman's request. Yes, of course. So you want yesterday. Can you give me the exact time? Natalie took out her cell phone and told him the time of the first withdrawal. Then Arthur's eyes flickered and the man fidgeted. No, there's no need to check from now on. The first withdrawal was mine. I had to do something. Arthur was embarrassed under his wife's inquisitive gaze. There's no need to look from now on. Let's watch the next withdrawal. I must have just dropped the card. Or maybe it was stolen from you, said the policeman. No, let's look at the time of your withdrawal. The camera at the ATM was very well placed. Natalie could see in detail how her husband came in with the girl, withdrew the money, and gave it to his companion. Afterwards, they hugged each other, and it was clear at a glance that the two men were not just friends. Then they walked out of the door together, and a couple minutes later the girl returned. She had taken out the entire daily limit, and on this card it was not a small one. Natalie's card was a rewards card. The police officer smirked. The picture of what had happened was perfectly clear to him. It seemed to her husband's mistress that he had not given her enough money and she had decided to take more. Natalie couldn't deny the obvious either, staring furiously at the screen. When Maddie withdrew the last of the money from the ATM and walked out of the camera's view, Natalie turned around to glare at Arthur, who was standing behind her. The man wasn't there, nor was he in the hypermarket itself. Arthur had escaped in the first shots. What's up? Are you going to file a report, or will you deal with it this way, family style? The policeman grinned. Of course I will. Natalie snapped at him. Where do you see family? That crook robbed my husband. After saying goodbye to the policeman, Natalie hurried home. She didn't really go home. She had no home now, only a rented apartment. She knew she would find Arthur there. Where else could he go? The woman was not mistaken. Her husband was there, packing his things into a suitcase. Ah, asshole, packing. Where are you going, you bastard? Where are you going? I understand you broke up with that other one of yours. Otherwise, why else would she pull your card? Just like the last time she'd caught her husband in the act, Natalie couldn't help herself. Bastard, bastard, she shrieked and began to slap Arthur's cheeks. Arthur missed the first couple of blows by surprise, but on the next swing he grabbed her hand and squeezed it, causing pain. Enough, the man growled. It's already clear, I'm leaving. Natalie was taken aback. This was not at all what she had expected from her husband. The woman thought he would crawl at her feet, begging for forgiveness like last time. And she knew she would forgive him again. What else could she do? How to be alone now? Natalie pulled her hand away and spoke without the same urgency in her voice. Where are you going, you bastard? Stay here, I won't kick you out. Just know that from now on you won't get another dime of cash from me. Arthur grinned and for the first time looked at his wife with a look that expressed his whole attitude toward her. It was an attitude he had been masking for years. It was contempt mixed with disgust. What are you saying? She won't give me any money. Do you really think I'm going to stay with you on those terms? What do I need you for without money? I'll be honest with you, I was going to leave anyway. Do you really think I need you? Like this. Look at you, what you've become, without the usual care. A horrible, sick old woman. But you disgusted me before. Yeah, I can finally tell you that. Seriously, could you believe that someone like me could love you? That's what your mother always told you. You're a fool. Arthur just enjoyed seeing Natalie's face change at his words. He had longed to say it to her face. He saw the anguish his words caused the woman and reveled in it. The man took all his belongings, bought with Natalie's money, and this time she didn't stop him. She didn't care about that. The woman sobbed in the chair, curled up in a fetal position. Neither when Julia had died, nor when her son had thrown her out of the village house with contempt, had Natalie felt half the pain she felt now. Arthur had become her life, her everything. And it turned out her mother was right, and so were her jealous friends. Arthur never needed Natalie himself, he only needed her money. Now it's gone and there's nothing to keep a man around. Natalie stood up and walked wobbly to the mirror. A wrinkled, unkempt old woman looked back at her. Her long, uncolored hair was streaked with gray. And the face. It was better not to talk about the face at all. Natalie recoiled from the mirror. She went to the bed and collapsed face down on it. The woman's body shook again with sobs. The policeman, who had been with the couple at the shopping center the day before, was a little surprised to see the victim the next day at his office. "Hello, why have you come again? The statement is made according to the form. We'll look for your thief. I'll let you know the results by phone." "I want to rewrite the statement," Natalie said in a hoarse, torn voice. "It was my husband who stole my card and stole money from it. Yesterday I kept quiet. He intimidated me." The policeman frowned, staring intently into the victim's face. "Woman, you shouldn't turn your family squabbles into a criminal case. I saw yesterday." "You didn't see anything," Natalie interrupted. "I'm going to report my husband. He stole from me. He and that girl were working together. Let him go to jail. Let him go to jail." Natalie's face twisted in silent sobs. "Give me the form. I'll write." Natalie shook her head as if she couldn't believe her ears. "What do you mean there's no inheritance?" "You're confused. My mother had a house in the country. She still has one. And I know for a fact she had money in her bank account. And I am her direct heir, her only heir." The notary, with barely perceptible judgment, stared at the woman sitting across from her. By coincidence, she was a little aware of the family's affairs. What an interesting daughter, who had turned Julia into a nursing home to die, and now came to claim her inheritance. The young notary, who knew Julia and Billy personally, even gloated a little, saying, "The house in the village is there, that's true. Except that it didn't belong to Julia at the time of her death. She transferred it to her grandson Billy as soon as he turned 18. Billy, I take it, is your son." "No way. What do you mean, reissued it? Is that legal? Can I challenge it?" Even though it wasn't professional, the notary couldn't hold back her snide grin. "Of course it's legal. You can try to challenge it, of course. It's your right, but it's useless. Julia was of sound mind, I can vouch for that. I did it myself, and I'm 100% sure you'll only waste your time and money." "Yes, that's right, money. What about the money?" "Mom still had it. Julia had no accounts at the time of her death. I didn't touch on that, that's banking, but I can tell you that because I know. At the same time, Julia closed her accounts and opened a new one in her grandson's name. So once again, you have no inheritance." Natalie walked out of the notary's office stunned. The news that there was no inheritance was a blow to her head. She had been counting on that money. Natalie had recently undergone brain surgery. In a paid clinic, they found a hematoma, apparently formed after the accident, and the woman stayed there to have the operation to remove it. Paid clinic, paid room, paid tests, the operation itself, after all. The money from the sale of the apartment, which could not be cashed by the swindler, flew so quickly that Natalie did not have time to blink an eye. But even though the operation had been carried out in a good clinic, there were still repercussions. Natalie sometimes had tremors in her hands and lost concentration and attention. She became distracted, and her previous job was out of the question. The doctors said that with a good rehabilitation, the consequences of the operation could be eliminated, but where would the money for this rehabilitation be found? Natalie was sure that soon she would have it, so she didn't save much money. At least she had enough sense to pay her rent a few months in advance. Otherwise, she'd be on the street right now. Natalie walked from the notary to her apartment and gritted her teeth in anger. She was angry at her mother, at Billy. What right did he have to this house, to the money? And the woman was also angry at Arthur. Angry wasn't the right word, but she was suffering, hating him and longing for him at the same time. After Natalie filed a complaint against her husband, accusing him of stealing her bank card and withdrawing money from it, Arthur was arrested. Before the trial, Natalie went to see him. When the man saw her, he was overjoyed at first. "Natalie, please forgive me. I'm sorry for everything, for the rude words. I said it out of anger. I don't really mean it. I'm begging you. Please take the application." "You realize you're facing real jail time." Natalie grinned. I can even tell you firmly, you'll go to jail, Arthur. I talked to the prosecutor. You're looking at a year and a half. A year and a half for what? You know I didn't steal anything from you. You gave me the money. You gave me the card. You can't prove that. Then you'll go to jail. What do you want, Natalie? Arthur gripped the iron bars of the bars through which they were allowed to communicate and stared into the face he hated. Do you want me to beg? Do you want me to kneel? Come back to me, Natalie said quietly. Come back to me, but forever, and at the trial I'll say I was wrong. You didn't steal the map. Your girlfriend did. Arthur flinched and widened his eyes. He hadn't expected that, not even from Natalie. After all, how much this woman does not respect herself, ready to forgive him endless cheating, all the words that he said to her before he left. Arthur was even flattered by such love for him, but to live with Natalie all his life. He laughed. You know what? I'd rather sit down. What's it gonna cost me? I'm in and out. My sentence will be over someday. Living with you is a life sentence. Living with an ugly, destitute invalid, it's worse than prison. Natalie walked out of the jail like a spitting image, even more humiliated than the first time. She hated the whole world, living on her last dime and eating cheap sausages. She had never fed her cat that kind of sausage before. There was one last hope. Billy was due back from the army any day now. He can't leave his sick mother. We'd have to go to him. Natalie took out her cell phone and looked at the amount of money left on the card. She had enough for the ticket to the village, but not enough to get back. Julia's house was noisy and cheerful. It was buzzing with the village youths, celebrating Billy's return from the army. The tables had been set by Leslie with the help of her parents, who looked after the house in the absence of the owner. Billy had allowed them to use his grandmother's huge plot of land, and Leslie's parents, in turn, had promised to give some of the money from the harvest for the wedding. Leslie couldn't get enough of her fiancé. If he went to the army as a boy, now he was a young man, tall, broad-shouldered, matured. The girl waited for him faithfully, and it did not occur to her to look at other guys. How could one notice others when she had the best? She admired and swooned with happiness that this handsome man in the uniform of the airborne troops belonged to her, only to her. Leslie, let's go out for some air, Billy whispered to the girl. They took hands and walked out of the house. Billy took the girl to a flimsy, but still standing wooden bench. Billy, have you had a little too much to drink? No, Billy shook his head. It's just that in the house I'm always waiting. It seems like Grandma's about to come into the room. I miss her so much. Here, on this very bench, she spent hours waiting for me. When I ran away from home, she waited. And then so often, when I was studying in the city, Grandma would sit and stare at the road, waiting. The boy gulped air and, trying not to cry, stared at the very road he was talking about. A lone figure was still walking along it, and something about the figure seemed painfully familiar. It's your mother, exclaimed Leslie, as the woman drew near enough to be recognized. Billy, not saying a word, frowned at his approaching mother. Billy, hello. Natalie made no attempt to hug her son, but instead shrank back, standing at a distance. Why did you come here? What do you want here? I told you everything after the funeral. I'm not changing my mind. Billy, I missed you so much. You're the only one I've got left. I broke up with Arthur and I realized how wrong I was about him. I know, Mom, Billy laughed. I know everything. And the circumstances under which you broke up with him. You lost your apartment because of that bastard. Grandma was so sorry she put it in your name when she bought it. I'll tell you something else. I know why you came here. You may be surprised, but the notary you were with knew Grandma personally. After your visit, she called me right away. You really need Grandma's money and that's why you came here. Did you? Well, face it, Billy, I'm more entitled to it than you are. I'm your grandmother's own daughter. And don't forget, I'm your mom. Mom? Moms don't do that. And neither do daughters. My grandmother was my real mom, and I will never forgive you for what you did to her. You? Billy choked. Look, just get out of here. Don't make this a sin. Natalie cried. Billy, I don't have any money, not at all. I can't buy a train ticket. I can't buy food. And I can't work. I have to get treatment. Billy looked with contemptuous pity at the woman he had once been so attracted to, so eager for her affection and warmth. Wait here, he muttered, and dashed into the house. Leslie sat on the bench with her legs tucked under her and her head down. She had nothing to say to the woman awkwardly shuffling beside her. Billy came out and quickly slipped a $5,000 bill into his mother's hands. "Here, this one's for your return ticket and food. But this is the first and last time. I don't want to know anything more about you. I don't have a mother. I'm not kidding. Don't talk to me again." Natalie wandered back down the dusty road, dragging her feet like a beaten dog. Billy didn't look at her. He put his arm around Leslie's shoulders and pulled her into the house. "Let's get going, or our friends will be bored without us." Billy and Leslie's wedding was also in the village. Billy wanted to celebrate in a modest way, but his parents had made the most of it. The village was buzzing for 3 days. It's been a year. Billy, in a used foreign car, drove to an unfamiliar house. He rarely visited this part of town. Next to him, in the passenger seat, sat his friend. Actually, Billy had his own auto repair shop. He had bought a 2-story garage with his grandmother's money and remodeled it, starting his own business. Billy hired 2 of his former classmates to help him. Billy had golden hands, and friends are very responsible. So, in a short time from the clients in the car service center was not an outpouring. And here, one of these customers tearfully asked the guys to drive up to his house for an extra fee. The old Neva did not want to start, and the client could not get to the car service. When the guys drove up, an old man jumped out of the gate to meet them. "I'm glad you didn't refuse. Let's go to the garage. My old lady is there." Billy's friend waved his hand. "We'll see now. Don't worry. I'll just run to that stand over there and get some water. It's hot. I can't breathe." "Billy, do you want anything?" "We'll go together," Billy said. "We'll be right back," he nodded to the customer. Entering the stall with the peeling door, Billy was stunned. Standing behind the counter was his mother, who had aged abruptly, with faded eyes. "Billy," she exclaimed with hope in her voice. "How did you find me?" "Give me a bottle of mineral water," Billy said aloofly, as if to a stranger. He silently paid and quickly jumped out of the stall. "Billy, who is this? Is this woman a friend of yours?" Billy asked his friend, who could barely keep up with him. "No, I don't know her." Billy cut him off. The snow crunched joyfully under her feet, and that familiar sound from childhood filled her heart with joy. Katie was an optimist in life, so she looked for the positive in everything around her. On this winter morning, she didn't mind the cold but tried to get to her destination as quickly as possible. She happily entered the parlor and the cold cloud followed her into the warm room. There was no one in the reception area. The staff jokingly referred to it as the reception area of no one. But from the hall came the indignant voices of people. "It's not May yet. At the entrance, you can hurry up." In the morning they said it would be down to -18 degrees. But for me, it's still 35 degrees. Who wants to do their hair in a freezer like this? "Really, Maddie, let me check the schedule." Katie walked into the room where the girls were preparing their tools. "Don't worry about it. It's just me, the oldest of the masters." Barbara said sadly. "We've forgotten about you, Kathy. I'm sorry, but we just can't get used to having a new owner." "I'm not surprised. I still can't get used to it myself. It's been almost a year. I feel like I'm stuck in the past." Barbara liked to talk about supernatural powers and horror stories. She took the bait right away. "Oh, girls, I don't know about you, but I often feel like I know what's going to happen in a minute. For example, recently I was walking down the street and a car was driving ahead. And in my head, I can already hear the clatter of the wheels, and they tell me where this car is going to turn. It's like deja vu. And then there was this other incident. Kathy didn't listen to the manicurist's fascinating story and walked through the break room to her tiny office. This small windowless room used to be used as a storage room, but when the girl moved to work, she decided to convert it to her office. The door was open, so she could hear everything the salon staff talked about before the workday started. Nancy decided to give her opinion on the deja vu effect. It was elementary, no fantasy at all. "It's easy to figure out where the car will turn. Let's do it again." That's a rational point. It upset Barbara. "And you know all this, even though we've called you to the everyday team." This provocative passage was answered in the same spirit. "Barbara, I don't understand the irony of your irony. And I know a lot because I did well in school and now I am constantly educating myself. Unlike some people, that was not a pebble, but a boulder to a respected employee. The reaction was instantaneous. If you did so well in school, why are you here hammering nails? Why didn't you go to college? Kathy realized that a scandal was brewing. She rushed into the hall to diffuse the situation. Lovely ladies, what have you done? Can you hear that outside? Julianne. Until now, Jessica said cryptically. They woke up Casey, and now something irreparable was about to happen in the beauty parlor of the ancient city. Nancy threw a towel at Casey, and everyone laughed. Barbara remarked peacefully, Kathy, don't mind us. We're not mad, so to speak. We exchange words to practice. Otherwise, the client will get bored and we won't have time to chat. Maybe I'll go organize a break. There's still time. How are you girls doing? That question was directed to everyone except Katie. Nancy and Jessica nodded their heads like Chinese dolls. In this cold weather, it's better to heat up the tea. I just baked pineapple yesterday. Appreciate my culinary skills. Nancy pulled a small roll out of her tiny purse. Jessica took one look at the bundle and grimaced. Nancy, who are you going to treat? You can't keep a story like this going for long. You're a sly one. Come on, let's go. I'll teach you how to heal. A kettle whistled in the recreation room, or simply in the back room, and the girls rushed to the sound. They had forgotten to invite their host for tea. But Katie had long since stopped taking offense at such trivialities. She sat down in the vacant chair and thought. Despite the apparent friendliness, this small group of women did not want to recognize her as a hostess. A small salon and the cosmetics store next door were inherited from her mother, who tragically died a little over a year ago. The girl herself at first was afraid of the inherited business and at first even going to sell the salon, but her grandmother managed to convince her otherwise. But if you sell the salon and the store, you will waste money. And then, what are you going to do? Go yourself to earn a piece of bread, at least in memory of Mom, and continue what she started. She resisted for a long time, but then she gave in. Okay, Grandma, you've convinced me. I just don't understand why you didn't start such an interesting endeavor yourself. Emma rolled her eyes. She always did that to impress the person she was talking to. What are you talking about? At 60, it's too late to start something, and 22 is too early. I just got out of college, and all of a sudden this happened to me. It's an inheritance. Don't blame fate, granddaughter. And youth is the best time to start. A woman of that age was busy talking to her granddaughter and turning her brain to memories. With a quiet nostalgia in her voice, she said, You know, Kathy, when I was still in high school, a long-distance ship captain told us about America. He was invited to our class period. He said that at that time, even the children of the rich earned pocket money, and they were not proud of their position and took any job. Washing dishes in cafes, delivering newspapers. Grandma, you should remember what it was like in the Tsar's time too. Everything has changed in half a century and decaying capitalism has long since penetrated us. Emma nodded confusedly. You are right. You are right, my dear. I'm really stuck somewhere in the past and I can't get out of it. Katie looked at her grandmother in surprise because she didn't understand how anyone could be stuck in a time that had already passed. But in recent months, she herself had been mentally escaping more and more often to a place where her parents were still alive. Her eyes watered, and she took a deep breath to hold back the tears. Jessica's voice came from the back room. Where have you been? The tea was ready. Katie flinched and looked toward the back room. Nancy froze on the threshold. It's not good to alienate yourself from the team. You may be our master, but you're human too. Kathy felt discomfort in his stomach. She hadn't had breakfast today because of her grandmother, and now her empty stomach reminded her of that. Thank you, Nancy, but I'm still smiling. I can't say no. And it's not hard to guess from your eyes that you either forgot or just didn't have time to eat today. So put aside false modesty and let's go. Katie was happily sipping her hot tea and savoring the taste of the freshly baked pastries. It crunched so amusingly like snow under her feet. The girl held a piece of kindling in her hands and smiled. Barbara couldn't help herself. You say, Kathy, don't hesitate. Try the apple pie. It's a GSITA specialty. The young salon owner felt warm and cozy in the company of these simple women. She ate the pastries with pleasure. And wise Barbara thought this girl was still a child. Nancy and Jessica looked away too. The same thought must have occurred to them. The front door slammed, and Barbara commanded, "Girls, morning break is over. Time to get to work." Apparently, a customer had come in for a haircut. The woman cheerfully got up and disappeared out the door. But a few minutes later she returned, confused and bruised. "Kathy, someone's asking for you. Some big guy who looks like a 204th midshipman. I've never seen him before. Barbara, why don't you invite him into my office?" The girls quickly cleared the table, and only the smell of vanilla reminded them of the recent tea party. Kathy was waiting for a visitor in her office. From afar, she heard his disgruntled voice familiar. "I'm not inclined to walk around corners, ma'am. Would your mistress please step outside?" A tall man in his 30s completely blocked the entrance to the study with his body. He looked down at Kathy as if she were a small insect in front of him. The girl felt uncomfortable under his unpleasant gaze, but she kept her composure. "I'm listening attentively." "Is that you, mistress?" Not a muscle trembled on the girl's face. She endured his gaze, answering boldly and calmly, "Yes, it's me. What's wrong with you?" Without waiting for an invitation, he sank down on the only chair. "I don't really care. It's just that a case came up and I was asked to pass it on." The man paused and looked intently into Katie's face again. "No, jokes aside, you really are the owner. This isn't a setup. Would you mind looking at the license in the reception area? Our salon operates in full compliance with the law." "Yeah, I don't mind. It's all the same to me, but I've never encountered such a young owner before." He continued to look at the owner rudely, but there was something in his gaze that made the girl blush. But the guest did not hurry to explain the purpose of his visit. "No, seriously, it's just a coincidence. I was told that a woman works here, and I see a beautiful lady, but perhaps it's for the best. With such a charming young woman, we'll have an easier time negotiating." "What do you intend to negotiate with me?" "I'm sorry, but I don't have time for idle chatter, so I'll ask you to get down to business." The painter laughed. "I like to be asked to cut to the chase. I'm second to none in that regard, and I can certainly satisfy your curiosity." The visitor's insolence was beginning to irritate Kathy. She picked up the landline phone. The visitor became alarmed. "What do you think you're doing? I'll call the police to have you removed. Why did you come to my salon? And why are you talking nonsense?" The man pressed his huge paw on the girl's arm. "Wait, beautiful. Don't be in a hurry. It's just my overflowing emotions. Have you made a great impression on me? I came here on business. My boss wants to buy this salon and store." "That's impossible." "Why not?" "Because I don't plan to sell my business. This conversation is over. Goodbye." Katie got up from the table and headed for the exit, but a visitor blocked her way. "No, we didn't have a deal. I'm seeing you for the first time. I don't know your boss and I don't want to know him." The girl shuddered, whether from fear or anger. The visitor took off his starry cap and wiped his sweating forehead with it. Apparently, the girl did not understand simple words. That was a pity. Then I'll have to explain more emphatically. "Listen, beautiful. My boss is a very respectable man, and he has an arrangement with the former owner of this place. I don't know anything about that, and my mom's dead. It's been almost a year. We're sorry for your loss, but that doesn't change anything. The duty of a forgetful master still stands. My master doesn't forgive such things. He even warned your mother, but she didn't take it to heart, so the meter is running. But we're not animals, and my boss is ready to buy your salon and store." Katie shook her voice and screamed at the scoundrel. "I'm not selling anything. Don't be in a hurry, beautiful, to answer. You have a month to think about it. And don't forget, as time goes on, the debt grows." Voices came from the hall, interrupting the sound of cheerful music. But Katie was still shaking from the fear she had experienced. Several times she picked up the phone and put it back on the machine. Jessica burst into the office. "Katie, we need to order some balm. We're running out of gloves too." "Oh, what's the matter with you? You don't look so good." "Oh, it's nothing. I'm fine. Just keep working. I'll be sure to order." For the rest of the day, the girl could think of nothing else but the strange visitor. Her late mother had never interfered in her affairs. Her grandmother had shown no interest in the business either, so there was almost nowhere to look for information. But at that moment, Katie was badly mistaken in her conclusions. The girl planned to question her grandmother in detail about everything about the business and her parents. All she knew was that someone had given her father some money to start his own business. He decided to start a car repair business because he was knowledgeable in that field. But the business faltered almost immediately, and the man sold the unprofitable enterprise, and Katie's mother persuaded him to give her the money from the sale. "Tony, I've got a great idea. I've thought of everything." Kathy clearly remembered how her mother had convinced her father in the kitchen that beauty was the most profitable business. The girl was still in the 3rd grade and was too young to understand the essence of the conversation. But the words of her father she remembered well. "Wanda, from afar the tree looks like a forest, but when you look closer, you realize it's not what it looks like. And so it is in business. I too thought that car service would be in great demand, but I was very wrong. You have to consider scale. So you're saying that success depends on geography?" Of course it does. There's a direct correlation, and that's where I made a big mistake. After all, the income of the population in small towns is lower than in a large metropolis, hence the low purchasing power. In principle, it's nothing new. This is the basis of economics, which should always be remembered. Believe me, your salon will suffer the same fate. Although your plan is quite feasible, even in the size of our little town of Tony. Tell me straight, will you give me the money? Do I have any other choice? Of course I'll give it to you, but you'll have to ask Leslie for a deferred payment. Tony, Leslie is a very kind person. I'm sure she won't refuse you. She's done so much for us already. There's just one thing I can't figure out. Why does Mom have a prejudice against her? Wanda, you know I'm not one for gossip, but the locals say she and Leslie have a long-standing feud. That's why your mom left the regional center and settled in this town where wealthy people like to vacation. I can't confirm it, but that's what they say. By the way, I also hoped for an independent clientele who spend their vacations here. But life has shown that wealthy citizens suffer from pathological greed. I don't agree with you. No one can resist a woman's beauty, even millionaires. That's why beauty salons are a priority for wealthy ladies. They know a lot of ways to get money out of their stingy husbands. Wanda, I didn't realize you were also a psychologist. When discussing business matters, the parents kept nothing from their daughter. But at that time, Katie, because of her young age, understood little of adult conversations, and most of the complex information flew in one ear and out of the other. But this year, events from the past began to surface, taking on a completely different meaning in the context of today. And after all, it was a long ago conversation between my parents. Memory hadn't accidentally retreated from its archives either. Katie walked around the apartment where her happiest years had flown by. Everything here still reminded her of her parents and created the illusion of their presence, dear to her heart. One thought kept running through her mind. Aunt Leslie, why am I only remembering her now? Leslie was an infrequent visitor to their home, but she always showed up with gifts. Katie disliked the old lady, which displeased her parents. One day the father decided to find out the reason for his daughter's dislike of this acquaintance. "Tell me honestly, why don't you like Aunt Leslie? After all, she brings you so many gifts." Without thinking long, Katie answered honestly, "There's something about her I don't like. She has eyes like a witch's, and she doesn't tell the truth." Her father was surprised. "That's a conclusion. And for some reason, you thought Leslie was a peer. She was warned about her, but she didn't pay attention." When the grandmother learned of this conclusion from her granddaughter, she said to her daughter, "Wanda, don't forget that through the mouth of a child speaks the truth. Children are capable of sensing insincerity at a distance. Unfortunately, as they get older, that ability fades. Therefore, unfortunately, Leslie jokes and sweet words are taken at face value. In general, for little Katie, her grandmother was a role model. The girl absorbed her every word and believed in everything Emma said. Feeling the urgent need for her grandmother's participation, the girl dialed her number. Emma answered right away, finally deigning to call. "I thought you'd forgotten I existed." "Well, I called you last night." "You did? Then why didn't I remember?" The girl guessed the reason for Emma's forgetfulness from her voice and manner of speaking. And it wasn't hard to guess that the woman had already had a few shots of alcohol, as she called it, wine reinforcement. She had developed this bad habit after the tragic death of her daughter. Katie tried many times to instruct her grandmother on the way to the truth, but she was annoyed and advised her to take care of herself. Therefore, the granddaughter decided not to focus on this fact. Grandma, we'd all tend to forget details and sometimes even important events. You know, today I suddenly remembered Aunt Leslie. Please don't even mention that name to me. But why? What did that woman do that you don't want to talk about her? Well, she didn't do anything in particular, except for one despicable act. Maybe someday I'll tell you everything, but not now. It's not time yet. Okay, but I have a few more questions that only you can answer. I stopped by your place near Vegas, and then I heard someone else's laughter. No, my dear granddaughter, you can rest today. And they're ready for a serious conversation. Besides, I'm not alone. That's a good place to start. All right, then I'll come and see you tomorrow morning, Katie. But not too early. Don't bother me. You know I'm an old man and I need a good night's rest. The girl threw the telephone coffee table with anger. I know all about your resting habits, and you don't need to cover yourself with your age. She realized she had no moral right to judge her grandmother, but Emma's addiction to alcohol was becoming a serious problem. Once a well-groomed, attractive woman, in just a year she had turned into a perpetually disgruntled person with a permanently scowling face. Many acquaintances openly expressed their opinions. Unpleasant remarks. Why don't you take care of your grandmother? Can't you see that she drinks herself to death? The women in the salon also often discussed this topic behind her back. But somehow all the well-wishers blamed Katie for her grandmother's weakness, and that depressed the girl most of all. In the evening, she tried to call her relative again, but heard only a long dial tone. As soon as there was light outside the windows, Katie was already on her feet. She decided to visit Emma first and then stop by the salon. She pressed the doorbell button for a long time until she heard the familiar barking and footsteps outside the door. I asked you to come later, but come in. Don't stand in the doorway. The girl carefully closed the door behind her. Grandmother, what is this rudeness? Who are you talking so angrily at? Of course, read it to my neighbors. They have a habit of peeping and eavesdropping. Yesterday, we were sitting quietly and peacefully, and here you are. What happened at your party last night? The downstairs neighbor came early to warn us. She was disturbed by our beautiful songs. Katie's put the kettle on. You better not grumble. Let's have tea together now. You're scolding your neighbors for nothing. They have a right to a quiet life too. And I'm not disturbing them. If that were true, they wouldn't be expecting you to visit in the evening. Kathy, have you come to lecture me on morality or to support me? More of the latter. The kitchen was a mess, and the girl struggled to find a free chair for Emma to sit on, but she sat down on a small upholstered stool that didn't fit in with the room. The older woman sighed heavily and nervously ran her fingers along the edge of her robe. She tried not to make eye contact with her granddaughter Katie. I'm sorry. For what? You've always been nothing but good to me. What do you blame yourself for? Everything. That's why I drink to forget. I can't forgive myself for what happened first to Tony, then to Susanna. Did those words nail a girl to some golden sweet spot? Grandma's saying something bad about herself. You can't do that. You're not responsible for their deaths, and the investigation confirmed it. What are you talking about, granddaughter? Just the inquest about what you're talking about. Just to get rid of this case and report back. No one has investigated it properly, even though I asked and even wrote to the highest authorities. Grandma, wait, I don't understand. What are you talking about? I'm saying that your parents didn't die by accident. Do you have any facts to back that up? That's the thing, I don't. It's all just speculation, but I do know that a few days before Wanda's death, there were threats. Tony also mentioned some phone calls. Kathy remembered a recent visit from an unfamiliar tough guy, and an unpleasant shiver ran down her spine. Surprisingly, I had a very unpleasant-looking man come into my salon a few days ago, too. Emma stood up abruptly, and the table fell with a clatter. There was horror in her eyes. Kathy, and what did this man say to you? I didn't fully understand it myself, but I thought he threatened me too. He said that my mother had an unpaid debt, and now I had to make restitution to the owner. What did he spit out? I never fully understood. The old woman grabbed the girl's hands. My girl, you have no idea how serious this is. These horrible people are capable of anything. You need to go to the police right away. Or do you want me to go myself? Where would you go in your condition? Look at yourself in the mirror and really become a grandmother. Let's get this over with. You have turned your home into a shelter for the hurting and needy. Remember, not so long ago you were condemning those who indulge in binge drinking, and now you've become addicts yourself. Emma buried her face in her granddaughter's shoulder and burst into bitter tears. If you only knew, my girl, what a heavy weight is on my heart. It tears me from the inside, and I don't know how to go on living. The girl stroked her grandmother's back like a little child. Once upon a time, Emma had been the one to comfort her like that, and now she was trying to regain her faith in her beloved self. Grandmother, don't blame yourself unnecessarily, and don't look for fault where there is none, and let it go. I'll try, I promise you. I'm disgusted with myself too. But still, do not disregard my advice and go to the authorities. What should I tell them? That you've been threatened. Facts. There's no proof, and I don't know the guy who came to see me. He's definitely not from around here. Soon the morning conversation with the grandmother was forgotten because she had to resolve a conflict situation in the salon. One of the customers wrote a complaint against Casey and even demanded monetary compensation for badly trimmed bangs. Jessica was crying in the back room. Casey, this lady has 3 hairs on 2 appliances. I gave her a great haircut on what she had. I have something to graft my curls onto. Barbara winked at the hostess. I'll try to get it all sorted out now. That lady likes to make a scene. She's always dissatisfied with everything and everyone. Not even 10 minutes later, the stylist triumphantly returned and sent her home. Jessica quickly came to her senses. What did you do? Nothing much. A little bit of scissors above the ankle and then cascade down the back. Gorgeous hair. Now our client's gonna have a great haircut for a week. In a good mood. After a day of work, Katie headed home. On the way, she decided to stop at the store for groceries. The city streets were empty, so she immediately noticed a car with tinted windows following her. An unpleasant feeling of shivering ran through her body again. The girl tried to calm herself down. It seemed. Now she would turn down a dead-end alley and the pursuit would stop. But the car also turned down a deserted street. Unexpectedly to herself, Katie ran across the street right in front of the car and in a few minutes was already near a shopping center. She looked around and breathed a sigh of relief. There was no car behind her. The deputy chief of the district police department looked at her with undisguised derision. He glanced carelessly at the sheet of paper on which she had been marked. Dear Kathy, I understand your concern, but you should understand my concern too. There is no evidence that there is any real threat to your life. Everything you've told me here is based only on your hunches and suspicions. It's not a basis for a case. Comrade Major, but I'm not LSU, and the salon staff can confirm it. They saw this man come in, but they can't say they heard him threaten you. Yes, but why? And I repeat, your fears are not the reason. Do I really have to wait to be killed? As far as I'm concerned, that's the only time that reason will appear. Darling, why do you have to go to extremes? I'm not your darling. All right, Katie, maybe you're tired and you're dreaming. The girl could hardly hold back her tears. She wanted to tell this indifferent man in uniform everything that came to her heart. Comrade or Mr. Major. I've heard such words many times, you see, but it only shows your unwillingness to help. 4 years ago, my father died under very strange circumstances, and last year tragedy happened to my mother. They were also threatened, and my mom even went to the local police station hoping for help. But they wouldn't listen to her, and she died. Wait. I remember this case, or rather, it was reported to me. So you're the daughter. I wonder if you're saying your mother was threatened too. Did you see it or hear it? No, but my mom told me. You see, there you go again. Total uncertainty. The major suddenly smiled as wide as if he just won a big prize, Kathy. It happens. You've been through so much. Shocks are very hard on the nervous system. Have you seen a specialist? What kind of specialist? The major waved his hand uncertainly, but kept smiling. I'm not a medical man, but I've heard that there is such a doctor. Katie jumped up like a scalded woman. Do you think I'm crazy? I came to you for help. Did you? The girl ran out of the chief's office and ran into an employee who rushed to the major. Well, you're crazy, comrade major. Why do you insult girls? If I'm not mistaken, this is the new owner of the Paris salon. Do you know her? How can I put it? A little. Last year I was a district policeman, and the girl came to me after the death of her mother. The major nodded understandingly. He spoke of harassment, threats, and suspicion. Yes, something like that, but no specifics. And she has a grandmother, you must know her. She used to work in the mayor's office. After her daughter died, she started using. The policeman gestured to what the expression meant. Really? Yeah, it's like a Mexican soap opera. My grandmother also complained to me about threats and harassment. But you can't trust a witness like that, you know. It's only out of respect for her age that I don't put this woman on the register. But neighbors often complain about her, and we must respond to such signals. And there should be no discounting of age and status. We have tools to deal with antisocial elements, and they made a habit of going around, knocking on doors with their complaints. The major was very angry, and the former district officer regretted that he reminded him of last year's story. So the captain decided not to go into the details of that tragedy, although he also had suspicions that the successful entrepreneur died not by accident. Then the district officer tried to prove this fact to continue the investigation, but he was summoned to the police and reprimanded. And then he was transferred to the PPS. He considered it a punishment for being too proactive. Katie walked slowly down the street, not noticing the hurrying passersby. She was at a complete loss and didn't know what to do. Her grandmother again did not answer her calls, and the girl decided to go to the cemetery. In a difficult moment, she always visited her mother's grave. Father was buried in his small homeland, so decided his relatives. Grandma scolded them for it. What are you doing? Katie is Steve's only daughter, and you're denying her the chance to visit her father's grave. But the aunt, the deceased sister, firmly stated that if the daughter wants, she can come anytime and fulfill her duty. But I will not bury my brother here. This is not a good place. I didn't like Steve's idea of settling here from the beginning. He insisted, and here's the result. Dad burned to death in the bathhouse. First, they went fishing with the guys, had a few drinks, and then, as is tradition, decided to have a steam bath. Father's absence was noticed only during dinner. They rushed to the bathhouse, and he was there without signs of life. Everyone assumed that the man was poisoned by carbon monoxide, as there was a specific odor in the room. But the members of the company were surprised by this circumstance, so someone closed the valve early on purpose. But none of us could have done that. We're not amateurs. No one believed the theory that the deceased had created the dangerous situation himself. Katie's mother was devastated, and relatives who came from far away did not give permission for an autopsy. So the death of a young and healthy man remained unsolved. It remains a mystery to this day. Spring had only just thawed slightly from its timid warmth, so there were puddles and mud everywhere. Katie struggled to reach the flower bed, behind which stood a large wooden cross. They planned to erect a memorial, she and her grandmother, closer to summer. Katie stroked the picture from which her smiling mother looked at her and burst into bitter tears. Mommy, my darling, how I miss you. I feel like I'm living behind a transparent wall. I see people, I try to talk to them, but they can't hear me. Mommy, tell me what to do. This plea came from the heart of the girl. At that moment, she felt lonely and unneeded. But suddenly a woman's voice sounded very near, behind her back. Only humility will soothe the soul. Katie shuddered. She turned sharply and saw a woman wearing a black shawl that covered most of her face. She wanted to ask the stranger what her strange words meant, but the woman swept past her and seemed to vanish into thin air. The girl was frightened and hurried away from the cemetery. In the evening, she told her grandmother about the mysterious stranger, but Emma was not surprised. Most likely she had run into Nanny. She goes to the cemetery almost every day. Her son died. It had been a long time ago. It's been over 10 years. The unhappy mother comes to talk to him. Grandma, I talked to my mother too. Is this abnormal? The elderly woman looked at her granddaughter with surprise. Why do you think so? Now I even doubt my sanity. I went to the police today. A few days ago, I thought someone was following me. No, that's for sure, because a car was following me and then turned the same way I did to check out this obscure surveillance. Then that guy who came over in the winter, I don't like the whole thing. It can't be a coincidence. Grandma was washing dishes and froze with a plate in her hands. And what did the police station say? The girl laughed nervously. You won't believe it. The major advised me to see a doctor. That was to be expected. After Wanda's death, I went to our police officer too. At first, he seemed to listen to me. He even promised to reopen the investigation. But then things went quiet. And when I went back to them, they just politely threw me out. And then you started drinking. Emma burst into tears. It's the same thing. I'm not made of metal. And my heart is not made of stone. I lost my only daughter. They look at me like I'm crazy. And where can I find justice? Yeah, from my grandmother's. And I also had the feeling today that the world was divided by an impenetrable wall of indifference. The last thing Katie expected was a call from Leslie. An old friend of her late parents had called before the weekend and asked her to come over urgently. Kathy, honey, it's very urgent, okay? Aunt Leslie, I'll be there as soon as I have a minute to spare. No, my girl. Time is of the essence. Come back tomorrow. Do you remember my address? No, I don't. Kathy was puzzled by the call, for Leslie had not even been to her mother's funeral. She didn't call to explain her absence, nor did she come later to visit the grave. The fate of this unpleasant woman was the least of the girl's concern, so she did not inquire. And then Aunt Leslie suddenly found her. I wondered why she needed her so urgently. But Katie didn't absorb that call into the chain of strange events. After all, Leslie was already at the age when people often make unexpected decisions. At first, the girl planned to go to the regional center on her father's car, which had been standing in the garage for many years. But memories of the tragedy that happened to her mother stopped her. I'll go. It's safer for me to take the bus. But the traveler didn't know that local transport would stop at every village along the way. As a result of this unusual route, she arrived in town after 4 hours. Exhausted and hungry, she knocked on the door of the apartment where she had been once before with her mother. Leslie was probably waiting for her in the hallway because the door opened instantly. Katie, where have you been so long? I took the bus. Our public transportation is a disaster. I only use it on rare occasions. The rest of the time, I take a car or a cab. Oh, I didn't know you were an experienced driver. Oh no, what kind of driver am I? But I have a private driver when I need one. He's always on top of things. Good, kind guy. He runs my various errands. Although what errands can an elderly woman run? The woman used this popular maneuver to get a compliment, and she got it. Leslie, you underestimate yourself. You look great, and you're sure that men look up to you. Mistress Leslie looked at Kathy. You've embarrassed me. At my age, it's time to think about transients, not men. I'd had no luck with them all my life. And now, in my younger years, I often wonder if they're all like that. Are they all like that, or have I just met a few jerks? In the mouth of an elderly lady dressed in a luxurious robe, rude speech sounded even sweet, and everything in the spacious apartment was tastefully furnished. Expensive was felt in everything. It was cozy. The woman realized her mistake. Why am I keeping you at the door? Come in. Let's have some tea. We'll have a heart-to-heart. The suggestion of a heart-to-heart was immediately alarming to Katie. Her instincts told her to be on her guard. Leslie led her into the spacious living room, where the tea set had been left on the coffee table. They didn't stop talking for a moment. Katie thought that was the behavior of people who were either very embarrassed or trying to put the other person's guard down. At first, she was more inclined to the first option. But after the first words of her hostess, Kathy realized that Leslie had not very good intentions toward her. Make yourself comfortable, and I'll get the tea. The woman went slowly into the kitchen, and the guests walked toward the oak wall. Behind the glass shone a luxurious Chinese set, but her attention was drawn to several photographs. In one of them, Katie saw a familiar face, but she couldn't immediately remember where she'd seen it. A voice came from behind her. This is my daughter Caroline. She lives in the States now. I was very worried when she decided to go to another country, but my girl made the right choice. I was lucky in that. The hostess poured tea into miniature cups and kept looking at her guest. That piercing gaze made Katie uncomfortable. Leslie, you said you had something very urgent to talk to me about, didn't you? I apologize for my tardiness. You must be in a hurry. The thing is, if I miss the last bus, I'll have to walk. You're welcome to stay. I've got plenty of room. Thanks for the invitation, but I have to be at work tomorrow morning. We're having a small event and my presence is required. Katie didn't miss the scrutinizing glance. Leslie tensed at those words. Her voice took on a false note. You're talking about the kind of events that might take place in a rural beauty parlor. The guest carefully placed her cup on the napkin. You know, the most beautiful girls and women live in the countryside. It's just a different kind of beauty, a real beauty. And our institution decided to join this action. Beauty will conquer the world. By the way, this idea originated here, in the regional center. How interesting. And what's the point? Nothing special. A certain day is chosen, and on that day, all women who have a birthday on that day are served by our masters absolutely free of charge. Brides are exempt from the waiting list. Leslie was clearly surprised. I don't think that's very generous. You could fly out the window. And anyway, as a rule, there's not a lot of applicants. The promotion only lasts a few hours, but there are certain bonuses for the owners. No, it's still very dangerous. Personally, I take financial matters very seriously and never throw money to the wind. In fact, that's why I invited you here. The woman was silent, choosing her words. Do you understand me? Katie, I'm embarrassed to talk about this, but I have to. About your late mother. We were good friends with your parents for a long time. I'm sorry to hear of their untimely passing. Leslie waved her hand prettily toward the nearest tier, but Katie didn't fall for that ploy. She remained silent and looked directly into the eyes of her interlocutor. After a short pause, she continued, but her voice was firm and confident. So I have to inform you that Wanda, shortly before her death, owed me a small sum of money. I don't know anything about it. Do you have a receipt? How? Wanda and I trusted each other. Sometimes I borrowed from her, and sometimes she acted weird. According to the financials, Mom was doing well. I don't understand why she needed to borrow money, and she didn't like credit. She'd always tried to make do with what she had. The landlady was very agitated, as evidenced by the steam rising from her forehead. This was an unusual situation. So, Leslie, here's the deal. I'll find out everything, consult with my lawyer, and then I'll call you back. He should know all the details, and if everything you've told me here checks out, I'll pay you back every dime. Leslie was desperate. Katie, don't you believe me? Let's say I doubt it, and may I ask how much money we're talking about? The landlady stammered a figure and Katie laughed. But that's absurd. Leslie, are you sure you're not confused? The hostess managed to regain her composure, and she said defiantly, I don't have any abnormalities like your grandmother. What does my grandmother have to do with this sudden transition? Emma once ruined my whole life, and the mark of her malice still lingers to this day. And we were almost related. There were no more tears in the landlady's voice. I hated her at first. Katie wanted to leave the house as soon as possible, but Leslie stopped her. Take your time, dear. I'm not finished yet. I thought we'd settle this amicably and you'd sign a commitment. And I won't sign anything without a lawyer. Moreover, I don't understand your claims. I'm sorry, but I got the impression that you just want to take money from me. Although the amount you mentioned is not modest, why should I pay you for nothing? Your family is forever indebted to me and my daughter. Emma is the reason my daughter never knew her biological father and was raised by her stepfather. She seems to have destroyed my happiness, and these little crumbs are just a small part of it. Are you serious about this? They're just cents to you. Don't you think you're trying to trip me now, Leslie, and I could easily report you? Let me through. Leslie stood like an unshakable rock in the doorway, but there was a small space through which Katie slipped into the hallway, passing the sad figure of the landlady. The girl glanced once more at the framed photograph under glass on the wall, and at that critical moment, she recognized the smiling Amanda embracing the brightly painted girl, the same bodybuilder who had brought her to the salon in the winter. With one jerk, she swung open the door to the apartment and ran down the stairs. Only when she reached the first floor did she realize that the apartment building had an elevator. A nice old lady, introduced as a janitor or concierge, shouted unhappily, "Why are you walking? We have working elevators. It's not a big deal. It's good for your health. Once outside, Katie couldn't get enough of the fresh air. She felt like she'd been in a cramped cave for over an hour. Involuntarily raising her head, the girl noticed a familiar silhouette in the window on the 6th floor. And this involuntary exclamation made the couple walking with a baby stroller turn around. All the way back, Katie pondered what she had heard and seen. The mosaic of strange facts began to form into a complete picture, but many fragments were still missing. So the girl decided to go to Emma immediately. She needed answers to this cascade of questions. What an unexpected encounter. Emma was beyond excited. She radiated a bright wine amber color. Katie couldn't help herself. "Grandma, you promised me." The woman made a few awkward movements with her feet, but miscalculated and almost fell. Her granddaughter was there in time to pick her up. "Oh my God, you're completely drunk." "No, I'm not. I just had a few drinks. Oliver bought me a drink. You shouldn't say no when a nice man buys you a drink. Come on, I'll show you to your bedroom. You'd better get a good night's sleep now." "You're always right. My favorite girl." The woman, unsteady on her feet, headed for the bedroom. "Katie, I didn't just drink tonight. I had a good reason. I wonder what I did today. I visited Wanda's grave. Wanda has such a beautiful monument there. You're a good girl. My daughter deserves to be remembered like that." In the hustle and bustle, Kathy forgot to tell her grandmother that the funeral company had installed the monument 2 days ago, so her relative's confession surprised her. "But how did you know?" "Kind people told me. You're always busy. Oliver was at his mother's grave. It's not far from ours, and he saw it. Then he drove me in his car, and then he treated me." Really, all that was left of universal kindness was to hand out balloons to passersby on the street. Emma said nothing because she was already having pleasant dreams. It was getting dusk outside the window, and Katie wanted to go home, but then someone rang the doorbell. The girl fiddled with the lock for a long time, and when she opened the door, she saw a man with a huge bag. Although the guest was quite drunk, his appearance in good suit indicated a normal social status. He placed the bag in front of him and solemnly said, "Here's a little present for you, Santa. Where is my beautiful speech in your ear?" The guest took a step forward, trying to enter the apartment, but Kathy firmly pushed him back out onto the landing. "Grandma is resting, and I suggest you go home too. Christmas was 6 months ago, more than that, so you're a little late with your presents." The man was dumbfounded. "How is that possible? We agreed to spend the evening together and relax. The members of our group should still come." The man laughed loudly, thinking his joke had succeeded, but Kathy didn't even smile. "Good citizen, please go home." "But how?" "You can have a drink with your group." Kathy slammed the door in front of her guest's nose. He shouted, "Tell Emma Oliver stopped by." "Oh my God, he seemed like a decent man. Why do people drink?" "We'll have to keep watch tonight. Granny's peace would be brought by someone else." Katie walked cautiously through the apartment and noticed with bitterness that there was dust everywhere. Trying not to make any noise, she cleaned up the living room. Then she washed all the dishes in the kitchen. A boiled chicken and soup lay lonely in the refrigerator. Empty pots testified to the fact that Emma hadn't cooked a proper meal in a long time. She sometimes had dinner with her granddaughter in the evenings, but during the day she made do with whatever was on hand. Katie was overwhelmed with emotion. She had to do something or she would ruin herself. When the apartment was cleaned up, the clock read almost 11 o'clock, but the events of the day kept her awake. Katie turned on the floor lamp and headed for the bookshelf. Reading had always been a reliable sleep aid. She had already reached out to pick up a detective novel by a famous writer when she noticed an old scrapbook. The tradition of keeping family photos in albums was a thing of the past. Now everyone has their own folder on the computer, and if they want to, they can remember the pleasant moments of life. The girl was intrigued by the rarity and began to carefully flip through the pages of the album. Many of the pictures were very old. The women in them were dressed in old-fashioned floor-length dresses and the men in jackets and vests. In other pictures, she could hardly recognize her grandmother. How beautiful and young she was. In many of the photos, there was a young man of pleasant appearance standing next to Emma, looking very much like her. The girl couldn't help but ask aloud, "Is that her brother? She never told me she had a brother." and I once cut him out of my life forever. Katie didn't notice her grandmother leave her bedroom, although she could tell by the look of her that she wasn't feeling well. But she tried not to show it. The woman took a seat next to her granddaughter. You know the proverb about the child without eyes who spoils the lives of 7 nannies? Who doesn't know it? But what does it have to do with folk omens? Emma sighed heavily. There's been such an ugly child in our family all this time. It's my little brother Edward. I hid that album. And you found it? I guess I must have forgotten to hide it properly last time. Sometimes, especially lately, I look at these old pictures and flip through this album, and it's like I'm going through my memory. Katie, if it's not too much trouble, could you get some water? Emma poured herself a full glass. Wanda never learned the whole story. The girl was impatient, like children who are waiting for someone to reveal their secrets to them. The magic box. Grandma, I'm going to faint from curiosity. Don't tease me. Tell me what you've been hiding all these years. And Leslie was talking in riddles last night too. The woman even jumped. You know Leslie? Yeah, what's the big deal? She called me and asked me to come over right away. Emma collapsed back on the couch. What an evil woman. She got to you. What songs did she sing to you? She could talk. She demanded money, said my mom owed her money, but I didn't believe her. It's all lies. Tony borrowed a small sum from her at first, but they paid it back immediately. I found out too late, or I wouldn't have let them get involved with that person. She's a real bitch. She'd invaded their trust, and on the whole, I have suspicions about her. Holding her breath, the girl looked at her grandmother, and the latter looked at her. Oh well, that's what I'm thinking, or about something else. Maybe we're worried about the same thought. I've been thinking about it for over a year now. It's already become an obsession. It seems like it's only been a few hours, but I've already lost sleep and peace. Maybe you can finally tell me about all the family secrets. Emma reluctantly began her narrative, but quickly became engrossed and even forgot about her poor health. Katie listened to her grandmother with her mouth open. She had never realized that stories like this happened in real life. Emma's great-grandfather was from a famous family of industrialists. The ancestors were famous not only for their fabulous wealth, but also for their generosity. Several generations were engaged in patronage of the arts, and there are still buildings built with their money where orphans and disadvantaged people found shelter. But when hard times came, most of the wealthy citizens hurried to hide with their wealth abroad. The family was large, and not everyone agreed to live abroad. The most enterprising of them, Carlo, secretly disappeared with the family capital, leaving his relatives with nothing. My father told me that the eldest of the family then cursed the wayward grandson in a fit of anger. This Carlo was a banker, and his business abroad was immediately successful. But we found out about it later. At that time, there could be no contact with foreign countries. The relatives could even pay for their freedom. But God had mercy on us. What happened to this Carlo? He came to his homeland, he did. But that was later, during the thaw. I was very young then, and Edward was 6 years older than me. Carlo was already old and could barely walk, but he proudly invited our father to come to America to visit him. But my father immediately sent him to a well-known address. He took offense, of course. But Edward's story about the American shocked everyone. The guy was obsessed with America, but only I knew about it because he trusted me. Grandma, but it doesn't add up. What happened next is what happened. In secret from us, Edward corresponded first with Carlo, and when he died, he corresponded with a certain Thomas. He was sort of his confidant. This Thomas came to our country twice, and Edward traveled with him. By that time, my brother was married with a young daughter. Edward knew several languages and worked as a translator, and then he was sent on a business trip abroad. Emma burst into tears. I still remember that day as if it were yesterday. We had never experienced such shame in our lives. Men in black came to us in the middle of the night and started asking about Edward. I won't tell you all the details, it's useless. In short, that's what our freethinker always called him. Father sought asylum in the States. Father's heart couldn't bear the shame. After all, a deserter's son is a stigma on the reputation of a party worker. It's good that Mother didn't witness it. She died earlier. That's the story. Grandma, wait. What happened to Edward's wife and daughter? Did you guess? No. Katie looked at her grandmother wide-eyed. You mean to tell me that Mama, yes, Wanda, Edward's daughter and his unfortunate wife, couldn't bear the embarrassment Martha was constantly taken around to offices, interrogated, thought to be related to her husband. The poor woman couldn't bear it and went mad. I took Wanda with me, and I changed her middle name so she wouldn't even remember the betrayal. Yes, it's a hard story, like in the movies, except it's a very violent movie. But I want to believe that it will have a happy ending. Grandma, wait, you didn't tell me about Leslie? Leslie was a troublemaker who haunted Edward for a long time. She had no shame in front of anyone, not even her brother's lawful wife. Martha caught them together one day. She wanted a divorce, but she forgave him. Edward calmed down for a while, but then he started playing games again. I'd even suspect his brother wanted to run away with his mistress abroad, but it didn't work out, probably because of the papers, so Leslie was left to fend for herself. Why does she hate you? Because I caught them a few times meeting in a rented apartment, and then when Edward disappeared, she came to me and claimed it was Edward's daughter. But I don't believe that, because Leslie's the worst bastard I've ever seen. She's been married 5 times, all failed. Well, that depends on how you define success. She's got an apartment full of expensive furniture. Clearly, she doesn't need anything. Oh, and she said her daughter lives in America. It was Emma's turn to be surprised. That's an interesting fact. I didn't know that. Yeah, I guess we still have a lot to figure out, but I can't help but think that our relatives are up to something. Why did they need us? The woman protested. They're not relatives, and don't you dare even think about it. And don't go to Leslie's again. I have a bad feeling about this. Katie felt uneasy in her heart, but she didn't tell her grandmother. The next day she remembered her visit to Leslie's and the young man in the photograph. She recognized him as the same unshaven guy who had come to the salon. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place, and it frightened the girl. Emma gave in to her granddaughter's entreaties and decided to stay with her temporarily. Katie thought that the move would prevent the grandmother's desire to get the company together again. The old woman even became more beautiful. She had a desire to do something useful. Grandma spent her inexhaustible energy in the kitchen, trying to please her granddaughter with delicious dishes. When she noticed that Katie had gone somewhere, she called loudly to her. You eat first, and then you can fly in any direction you want. Grandma, I'd better go to the cemetery later. I need to put fresh flowers on Mom's grave. Emma was surprised. Are you going to drive after all? The girl winked playfully. Yes, but I only have 2 wheels. It's not healthy to drive with a full stomach. I'll quickly drive there and back. It was about 5 kilometers to the cemetery. The direct route was almost half the distance. Katie had long since mastered this route and was there in a quarter of an hour. From afar, she spotted a female figure that looked familiar. Kathy arranged the flowers beautifully and sat down on a bench. She gazed at the portrait of her mother set in marble and whispered about her difficult life. Engrossed in conversation with her independent imaginary interlocutor, the girl did not notice that there was an acquaintance nearby. The woman looked her directly in the eyes and was silent. Katie felt a familiar sense of discomfort. Is there something you want to ask me? Why aren't you saying anything? Watch out for Leslie. She's the trouble. Once again, Kathy didn't notice the strange woman disappear. She went down to the road and looked into the distance, but the woman was nowhere to be seen. The bus stop was deserted too. It was some kind of obsession, as if Nanny had vanished into thin air. Saddling a new horse, Katie headed back the way she had come, but the feeling that someone was watching her never left her. She stopped several times, but saw nothing suspicious. Cars passed by, but no one paid attention to the lone cyclist. To reassure herself, she said aloud, Maybe the major was right, and I have a persecution complex. It feels like someone's gaze is digging into my back. I can feel it physically. After looking around once more and making sure she was in no danger, Katie moved slowly down the familiar road. Her excitement had subsided a little and she admired the beauty of the blooming summer. The girl was riding on such a bridge as suddenly someone squeezed her and flashed by her side. But she did not have time to turn her head at this strange sound because an unknown force ripped her from the ground and threw her down. She woke up to a terrible pain in her leg. It hurt badly. A guy in shorts and a stylish baseball cap was looking at her carefully. How are you feeling? Any dizziness? She hadn't realized who it was yet. The guy kept watching her. I'm Richard, that's all. And my name is Richard. Let me help you up. My car is up there. Katie tried to stand up, but immediately cried out in sharp pain. My leg is probably broken. But it's not your fault. I saw the whole thing. That idiot deliberately pushed you off the bridge. I was about 50 meters behind him. I'm sure there are other witnesses to this accident. We should definitely go to the police station and file a report. The major's displeased face immediately appeared before the girl's eyes and she flinched. The young man asked, "Are you cold?" It happens from shock. I would also panic if I was dropped so abruptly from a height, but we have to find a way out of here. Grab my neck and hop on one leg. There's no other way out of this situation. The path went steeply uphill, so it took about 10 minutes to climb. Katie was completely exhausted. Her ankles were swollen and her leg was giving her more and more discomfort. I'll take you to the hospital first so the doctors can examine your leg. The girl looked in the driver's mirror and shrieked. Her whole face was covered in scratches and abrasions. Richard cheered her up and smiled. Those wounds will heal quickly and no marks will be left. But the leg is serious. What do you think about what happened? Nothing yet. I'm sure he was trying to send you to the other side. I could see the cyclist pick you up and throw you down like a feather. That remark piqued Katie's interest. Tell me, Richard, was he that kind of man? The girl tried to visualize with her hands the size of the man she knew. I can't be sure of the accuracy of my vision, but something like that. I couldn't see his face because he never turned around. He knocked you down and galloped away like nothing happened. You landed pretty good, by the way. There are some old concrete beams at the bottom of the ravine. Katie smiled again, but her laugh was one of despair, not joy. I think I left my bike down there. No, you didn't. Your two-wheeler is safe and sound. I threw it in the trunk. The guy turned onto a road leading to the center of the township. You know, I've seen you before. You work at the Paris Salon. It's a funny name for the province, but at least it's positive. Katie felt bad about her town. I own the salon, by the way, and the name of the salon is no accident. It's a kind of tribute to history. Really, I didn't know that. There was once a German industrialist doing business in our town. Nowadays, they call such people businessmen. And this man decided to decorate the main street with 3 bricks and named them in honor of 3 European capitals, London, Paris, and Berlin. Now I will tell everyone interesting stories. After all, I am omnivorous. I am interested in everything. I travel a little, collect stories, write articles. The only thing I haven't encountered yet are incidents like today. Katie laughed, but there was despair in her laughter, not joy. Did I say something wrong? It seems to me that today you have entered a new uncharted realm. It changes everything. After all, I came to visit and rest. My grandmother lives here. I try to visit her every chance I get, but I'm willing to sacrifice a few days to devote myself to this fascinating endeavor. You know, I feel like Sherlock Holmes. Kathy smiled. Richard, you're too ambitious, but I don't rule out that you really will help solve this mysterious case. It's just that we have nowhere else to turn for help. The police, they won't listen to me. They think there's something wrong with me. The car pulled up in front of the hospital and Richard helped Katie out. Can't you do it yourself? Let me help you. It's a weird day. We've been together for almost half an hour, and I don't know your name. I'm sorry, Richard, but falling headfirst off a bridge doesn't make you think about dating. Really, that was a stupid remark. No offense. The girl held out her scratched hand to him. Kathy. It was a pleasure to accompany a real princess to the emergency room. When Katie came home that evening on crutches, accompanied by a strange young man, Emma almost fainted. Granddaughter, what's wrong? My heart felt like it was in trouble. I told you to be careful. Richard tried to briefly explain to the old woman the essence of the case, but after his story, Emma had to be soothed with valerian drops. When the woman recovered a little, she said thoughtfully, I don't understand. Why? Why did they need us? Or do they hate us so much that they don't need a reason? Richard looked at Emma thoughtfully. Are you saying that your Leslie, as you called her, has such hatred that she's willing to sacrifice herself if something goes wrong? And other people? Oh, you just don't know her. I'd love to talk to her. Emma and Katie stared at Richard in surprise, and he felt embarrassed. I'm sorry to intrude. I came to visit my grandmother to get some rest. The thing is, I'm planning to open a detective agency. It's my dream, and everything seems to be in place. But I don't feel like I'm quite ready. Of course, I'd helped people before to the best of my ability, and more often than not, I've succeeded. But I've never encountered such an interestingly intricate case, which I'm sure is directly connected to your roots. I've never seen anything like it. That makes me want to dive right in. Excuse me, I'll go again. Kathy tried to stand up. But why are you sitting down? You shouldn't move around too much. Kathy, if you don't mind me visiting you, but as is customary, I'll bring tangerines. He smiled. I love my grandmother very much, but it's very boring here. Please come, of course. And then Katie hesitated. Grandma, what about Paris? I can't go there all the time. Richard immediately said, Well, Emma, maybe you could fill in for her. I'd be happy to be the driver. Emma raised her eyebrows. I don't believe you can't handle it. What's more, Richard and Katie already arranged it on the way home from the hospital. Katie had to tell me that her grandmother had started drinking, either out of fear or idleness, and to keep her busy for a while. It's a great distraction for an old woman. And as they talked, Katie almost forgot about it. She just didn't understand why Richard was making all these signs. She even thought he was having some kind of tic. But as soon as he moved toward the door, she immediately remembered, and she could hardly contain her laughter, because Richard's gestures, the way he raised his eyebrows, were unparalleled. Emma looked at her granddaughter, who was about to cry. Grandma, it's all right there, but you need to spend at least a couple hours there. Well, all right, just don't cry and I'll try. But let's make a deal. If I don't succeed, you and Richard take me back. Okay, thanks, Grandma. In the morning, Grandma went to wash her face with her hair neatly done. She looked around. Where are they? Are they awake? Yes. Did something happen? Of course something happened. Do you think I should go to the salon looking like this? Give me your makeup. I hope you have some. Grandma, you're hurting me. Don't forget we have a whole store full of cosmetics. Katie nodded toward a large cosmetics case. Emma walked past it. She took it and left the room. Katie didn't know what to think. Leaning back in her chair, she went into the kitchen. It felt so good to have her grandmother make her breakfast like a fairy tale. Katie heard Richard come in, and as Grandma sent him into the kitchen to drink coffee, the young man entered slightly stunned. In his hand, he carried comfortable modern crutches, such practical gifts he had never given a girl before. Good morning, Kathy. Oh, thank you, Richard. What happened to your face? I'm fine. Richard leaned toward her, barely recognizing his grandmother. Why? I don't know. She seemed different to me. They hadn't even had coffee yet. When Emma showed up in the kitchen, Katie gasped. Wow, I don't recognize you. The dominating cream, the skillfully applied makeup, had completely changed her face like a real fur coat. Before them stood a typical businesswoman who didn't mind spending money on herself. And I'm ready. Let's go. Richard stood up, of course. Kathy looked at him and couldn't understand how a man could take off a dozen years and all traces of serious injuries in a morning. An hour later, Barbara called. Kathy, how are you? Get well soon, and your grandmother has organized us here. Kathy, she asked. What's going on? Surprised, she hummed up. Grandma had already ordered gloves and makeup. She negotiated a discount, made remarks to each hairdresser, but she didn't forget to praise them. All in all, she was very active. Now she went to the store, and the girls decided to take a break and tell Katie everything, on the pretext of asking about her health. About an hour later, someone rang the doorbell. Katie was terrified. Grandma was at work and she had the keys. Who could it be? How could she? She cautiously walked to the door and listened. I'm a mean and scaredy gray wolf. She smiled and opened the door. Richard stood on the threshold and held a cake in his hands. I didn't know what you liked more, cake or flowers. Then I thought it was too early for flowers, so I brought the cake, especially since I like sweets too. The girl laughed. I'm getting used to your logical thinking. They settled down in the kitchen. They talked about nothing for a while, about the weather, about nature. And then Kathy said, You know, Richard, I'd love to dig into our family. I can't understand why my parents suffered. So you're 100% sure they didn't die by accident? Of course not, and I'll never believe it. They sat for a while. Richard listened carefully to everything that Katie had told him yesterday. She had told everything in literally 2 sentences, and today she had recounted in detail everything her grandmother had told her. He wrote something, then asked permission to take some pictures. I'm just documenting them and will return them so Emma doesn't notice. Yeah, okay. I think if Karlov didn't change his last name when he ran away, I might be able to find out something. Anyway, wait for me tomorrow. He looked at Kathy a little longer than etiquette allowed. He endured his gaze, and Kathy suddenly felt uncomfortable. I'm not saying goodbye. I'm bringing the most important figure. Katie laughed. I've already gotten a call from the barbershop saying Grandma is fussing there. Who knows? Maybe we're right. Maybe Grandma will find another interest in life. He stared at Katie again. I can't. It's Katie. Let's just drop the you thing already. The girl breathed a sigh of relief. Well, finally. They laughed. 2 weeks passed. Richard was still driving Emma to and from work. He hadn't told Katie anything new yet. The only thing he had said was that he had friends in America and had asked to know the family's secrets from the inside, so to speak. But Kathy began to look for herself. She read on the internet that Carlo had left behind a huge fortune, and his nephew Edward had inherited the rights to it. That was already something, but that was all the information on the internet. Apparently, the next step would be Edward's death, or had he already died? Wondered Katie. Weird. And anyway, if money was involved in all this, why did her father's relatives take him to bury him in his homeland? She realized now that she should have resisted, but they were all in such a state. Why were they saying this place was doomed? Did it have something to do with that? Katie was completely confused and fell asleep without even noticing it. She was awakened by her grandmother's voice. Katie, are you all right? Yes, Grandma, I'm here. What's wrong? Emma burst into the room. Richard burst in right after her. But thank God, Grandma. What happened? They tried to burn down your barbershop today. Richard turned to Emma. Let's tell the truth. They weren't trying to burn down the barbershop. It was a warning. You realize nobody burns anything in broad daylight. It was a provocation. There was a note on a piece of paper. Pay your debt. That's something. Katie was angry. You could report this to the police. And I agree. Attempted arson, the note. This time, Katie got a kind of reception. Who is this man with you? Your relative? Your husband? If not, please leave. The policeman looked at Kathy sternly. But it's clear even to a fool. Now it's going to be a dead-end case. No one here has ever solved a case like this before, and it doesn't look like it's any of their own doing. They never will. No, not the husband. Katie smiled enchantingly. This is a private detective from the capital. The policeman was somewhat puzzled. All right, I'll send you to an investigator. He'll take over your case. Well, what else can he do? On the other hand, if he manages to find something, this detective will be obliged to share it with them. And if he doesn't, what's the point? If even the detective couldn't find anything out, the investigator was a young man who tried his best to appear important and serious. His name was Tom. And blushing, he said, let's agree that when we're here, you'll call me by my first name and middle name. And when we're somewhere else, just Tom. Richard and Kathy nodded. Tom slid a blank sheet of paper toward him. Now let's start at the beginning. Kathy sighed. She had had to tell her family's story too many times in the past few days, especially since the story wasn't even hers. Rather, it belonged to the older generation. Tom asked interesting questions. Some of them Kathy couldn't answer because she simply didn't know. Grandma, of course, would answer them. Tom looked at them. I take it the case hasn't been opened before? No. I see. Let's do it this way. I need to go to the barbershop now. Document everything. Interview witnesses to open a case. When will it be open? It's not that easy to open. After that, I'll come to your place to talk to your grandmother. Something tells me the clue is too close. We can see it, but we don't understand it. It's too close. Katie sighed indignantly. If we'd solved this mystery sooner, maybe my parents would still be alive. Maybe they would be. Maybe not. We'll see. Richard helped Katie up to the apartment. On the landing, they heard a loud voice. Kathy's grandmother was looking at Richard with someone. They walked in, and Katie immediately realized everything. On the couch, The very homeless man was lazily sprawled out, and sitting in the chair was Leslie. "Kathy, hi. I'm here to see you. And you have strangers here." "Grandma's not a stranger to me." Emma turned to her granddaughter. "Katie, call the police. Don't you realize that they came to you without knowing that I'm here too?" Richard apologized. "Kathy, I'm going to the bathroom for a minute." The girl looked at him in surprise. He found the time. "Maybe now there will be such a scandal that I'll have to save them all." When Richard closed the door behind him, Kathy saw him pulling his cell phone out of his jacket. "That's it. Well, Richard, he was back in a couple of minutes." "So, Kathy, why don't we ask the uninvited guests to leave your house?" The homeless man smirked, stood up, and loomed over Richard. But Richard, though much smaller, didn't flinch or look away. Leslie grinned at Nose. "Why do you, a young man who knows nothing, think so badly of us? Your Kathy owes me a large sum of money. I realize she may not have that kind of money, but we've offered to let her go out of business. I'm even willing to pay a little extra. And that's just out of the goodness of my heart, so it's not worth it. As far as I know, Katie, you haven't borrowed anything. And Katie or her parents, what difference does it make? You have to admit, it's not fair that I should lose my money. After all, I loaned it to you." Emma couldn't take it anymore. "Aren't you ashamed? But I know for a fact that Wanda and Tony had no debts." "How do you know? You went crazy a long time ago and forgot everything. That's because you drink nonstop. I'm surprised you're sober tonight, and the night's still young." "Really?" Richard sat down in the chair next to Kathy and turned to Leslie. "Tell me, Leslie, who is this young man to you? What difference does it make to you?" "He's my daughter Caroline's fiancé. She lives in America. He came to visit." The woman looked at the homeless man, then at Richard. "Caroline has very important business there. She could make it. Can you explain why your future son-in-law wanted to send Kathy to the other side of the world? What the hell are you talking about? Why nonsense? You see, I followed him when he threw Katie off the bridge, and I have a perfectly good tape recorder in my car." Leslie looked at the bum confusedly. He moved toward Richard. "Where's the tape?" "Well, you know the answer yourself. It's in a safe place." The man turned to Leslie. "No, that wasn't our agreement." She looked at him angrily. "Jesus. But God gave idiots as relatives, so sit down and keep quiet." The homeless man hummed unhappily and sat back in his seat. "Young man, I'm sure you're wrong. Tell me, what is the reason for your visit today? If I understand correctly, the circumstances are not in your favor. Edward, Emma's brother, never recognized your daughter." Leslie choked. "Oh, so you did find out. But I hope you realize that there's so much money at stake that you don't have long to live." Then Emma asked, "Is he dead?" "Yes, Emma, 3 months ago. The thing is, Leslie couldn't prove her daughter was Edward's. They ran several forensic tests. Leslie spent a lot of money trying to manipulate a positive test, but Edward had a lot more money, so no one wanted to get involved. All the tests, of course, were negative." Leslie jumped up. "That wasn't true. The whole thing was rigged. We'll still prove it." "What can't you prove? And you've known it for a long time." "Edward inherited a huge fortune. Carlo wasn't just rich. His business was booming. When it became clear that he wouldn't confess, Leslie decided to eliminate potential heirs." Katie listened and didn't quite understand which heirs they were talking about. Meanwhile, Richard continued. He turned to Emma. "You were being a little deceitful when you said you hadn't spoken to your brother. But he has." Emma sighed. "He only came once, just for a few hours, to bring money for Wanda, but I kicked him out. Well, he also invited us there. I haven't seen him since." "That's right. Caroline wasn't kicked out, but he wasn't recognized. And when Leslie found out he'd gone to Canada, she knew she had to act fast. The thing is, your brother came to say goodbye. He had been diagnosed with cancer, but had lived a pretty decent amount of time. Things didn't go according to plan the first time. Yes, you genuinely thought Tony went to the baths with his wife, not alone. That shows your poor preparation, because Wanda couldn't take the bath. Did they recognize you? You appeared on the shore like locals who had just come from fishing." The bum smiled. Speak. Anyway, as you realize, no one will leave here already." And the man put the shotgun down beside him. Emma covered Katie with herself. She hugged her tightly. The girl cried. How could you? Why? Leslie sank into despair. For the money, dear. It should belong to us. The second time you decided to act for sure and damage the brake holes on the car. That seemed to be the end of it. But then Katie came of age. She posed no less of a threat. Leslie smirked. Well, where did you come from? A young man too smart for this rotten place. She turned to Emma and Katie. Well, what are you looking at? I've dreamed all my life. I've loved Edward, and he's loved me too. And if that old hag hadn't interfered, I would have gone with him. It's all your fault. Edward's money should belong to me and Caroline. Well, you realize that's impossible. Why not? Leslie stared at him with unseeing eyes. Because Kathy is Edward's direct granddaughter, which he recognized before he died. There could very well be a will. Yes, Leslie. So your daughter is now forced to care for notary Edward, and he's 20 years older than her. Rascal, where did you come from? Leslie grabbed the gun next to Sam and pointed it at Katie. If you die, it all comes to us. You don't need it anyway, but we do. Emma stood up and covered her granddaughter. Go away. There was a thud as Leslie tried to push Emma away, but she turned awkwardly. Richard slowly sat down on the floor. At that moment, the door flew off its hinges and the policeman burst into the room. Richard. Katie fell to her knees beside him. Richard opened his eyes. That's too bad. It was my first case. 2 months passed. Emma looked at her granddaughter. You thought well, she said. Katie kissed her on the cheek. Grandma, of course, you think for yourself. Where are we going to get that much money? I'm only giving half. But it's a huge help for our orphanages. Emma sighed. You're a smart girl. You're going to go to her now. Yes, Grandma, you know I should have done that a long time ago. I'm going to pick her up. There's a woman coming tonight to take care of her. She's not aggressive, and you'd think she's perfectly normal, just stuck in the time when Edward left her. Emma sighed again, and Katie looked at her incredulously. Grandma, aren't you jealous? She is our blood relative after all. Katie hugged her grandmother. You're the one who made that up. I must be bad. But I feel nothing but pity for the other grandmother. I just realize it's wrong. She did nothing wrong and should spend the rest of her life with her family. I love you guys very much. Emma waved her hand. Go to Cindy's. Grandma has a court date tomorrow. Yeah, I remember. I hope they get the maximum sentence. The trial dragged on because everyone was waiting for Leslie's daughter to be brought back from America. The girl ran away and it took a while to catch her. But now the whole family is here. Tomorrow their fate will be decided. From the Capitol. Even the judge who was to hear the case had arrived, and Katie had only one thing on her mind. She hoped the trial wouldn't be delayed by Richard being discharged in the afternoon. For a week, Katie sat in the hospital corridor looking like a shadow. 4 resuscitations, deterioration, improvement, clinical death. A week later, a tired doctor sat beside her. Well, rejoice. Your fiancé has come to his senses. I thought he would make it. Katie burst into tears and couldn't say anything better than, He's not my fiancé. The doctor smirked. Then he will be soon. You're Katie. He kept calling for you in his delirium. And a week later, she was invited to the notary's office and told about her grandfather Edward's will. He had left everything to his only blood granddaughter. She was given probation with some unthinkable hours to be served. Sam's out in 10 years, and Leslie got 12 years. She was screaming, banging on the cage. No, I don't want to go to prison. It's not right. Edward was my man. He should have left everything to me. Sam was grimly silent. It's easy to make money nowadays. This turned out to be some kind of not-so-jolly idea. Katie ran to the hospital. No, but why didn't she drive like a fool, honestly? She flew into the hospital lobby. Say, hasn't Robert been discharged yet? The nurse looked at her strangely and smiled silently and nodded toward the door. Katie walked slowly toward the door. It was strange. She's been here a long time. All the nurses are on a first-name basis with her. What's going on today? She pushed the door open and stepped back because a whole bunch of balloons flew at her. Oh. Katie looked at the balloons that filled the space under the ceiling and smiled. She had loved balloons flying upwards since she was a little girl. You like it? She jumped up. Standing next to her was Richard. You know what? and Richard suddenly got down on one knee and held out a ring box to her. "I promise. I'll release a whole bunch of balloons often. Just marry me." Katie nearly burst into tears. I think she cried for several nights because she realized Richard was going to leave the hospital and go home to the capital. Yes, yes, yes. She wrapped her arms around his neck and saw that there were a lot of people around. Her grandmother, the girls from Curson, Richard's parents who had come as soon as he was admitted to the hospital. Katie felt like the luckiest person ever. After all, so many people had come to be happy for her. It's a shame. Too bad her parents weren't here. But Katie was sure they could see everything. There was one thing that slightly dampened her happiness. She would probably have to leave with her husband. It was unlikely that the Metropolitans would agree to live in this town, and her grandmother certainly wouldn't. And that was breaking her heart. "Do you think maybe we should try to open a detective agency in this town?" Katie pulled away from him, looked into his eyes, smiled. "I told you how much I love you, with all my heart. Maybe I haven't gotten around to it yet." Kathy laughed, but then Richard said, "You're the best person in the world, and I love you very much." Richard hugged her. "That's all I believe in. Remember that I will always love you even more, always."